Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 16 years. In all that time, I've pulled more than 150 climbers off these 900-foot sandstone cliffs. Some were hurt bad, some were scared out of their minds. But until this summer, I never had to deal with shadows that climb better than humans. It was August 1971, and West Virginia was burning up under the worst heat wave in 20 years. The temperature hit 98 degrees that Tuesday morning when I found the first impossible chalk marks on the cliff face. I was doing my usual morning patrol, checking the base of the rocks for any overnight problems. That's when I saw them. Fresh white handprints going straight up the middle of Ecstasy, one of our hardest routes. Now, Ecstasy is rated 5.12C, which means only the best climbers in the world can even attempt it. And these chalk marks? They were on holds that didn't exist. I pulled out my binoculars and studied the cliff face. The marks went up smooth sections of rock where there was nothing to grab. No cracks, no bumps, no ledges. Just flat sandstone that would be impossible for any human to climb. "What the hell?" I muttered, lowering my binoculars. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Ranger Ironwood, you need to see this." I turned around to find Jake Mitchell, a local climber I'd known for years. He was pale and shaking, which was strange because Jake was usually as calm as they come. "What's wrong, Jake?" "I was up here last night, camping with my girlfriend. Around midnight, we heard voices on the cliff. Sounded like people climbing in the dark." He pointed up at the impossible chalk marks. "But that's not the weird part." "What's the weird part?" Jake swallowed hard. "They were moving fast, real fast, like they were running up the wall instead of climbing it." I looked back at the chalk marks. In 16 years of skewing climbers, I'd learned to trust my eyes and my experience. But this didn't make sense. Nobody could climb Ecstasy in the dark. Hell, most people couldn't climb it in broad daylight. "Did you see them?" I asked. "Sort of. They were dark, like shadows. But they moved like they had bodies." Jake shook his head. "I know how it sounds. Sarah thinks we were just tired, maybe seeing heat mirages or something." I wanted to agree with Sarah. Heat mirages made sense. Tired eyes playing tricks made sense. But the chalk marks were real. I could see them clear as day on rock faces that no human being could touch. "Jake, I need you to stay away from this section until I figure out what's going on." He nodded quickly. "Don't have to tell me twice." After Jake left, I radioed back to the station. My partner, Tony Martinez, was 10 years younger than me and had been climbing since he was 12. If anyone could explain the impossible chalk marks, it would be him. "Martinez, you need to get down to the base of Ecstasy. Now." 20 minutes later, Tony arrived in the patrol truck. He was a good kid, brave, strong, and skilled enough to free climb routes that scared most professionals. But he also had a hot head and something to prove. "What's the emergency, Rebecca?" I pointed up at the chalk marks. "Tell me what you see." Tony pulled out his own binoculars and studied the cliff. After a long minute, he lowered them with a frown. "Someone's been messing with us. Those marks are painted on or something." "From up there? How would anyone get up there to paint them?" "Helicopter, maybe. Some kind of prank." But Tony's voice didn't sound convinced. "Jake Mitchell saw climbers up there last night. Moving fast. In the dark." Tony snorted. "Jake's been hitting the bottle again. You know that." I did know that Jake had problems with drinking, but I also knew the difference between stories and genuine fear. And Jake had been genuinely scared. "I'm going up to take a closer look," Tony said, already pulling his climbing gear from the truck. "Tony, no. Something's not right here." "Come on, Rebecca. You're starting to sound like one of those ghost story tourists." He grinned at me, but it was forced. Besides, someone needs to check if the route's still safe. Might as well be me. I wanted to stop him, but Tony was right about one thing. We needed to know if the climbing route was damaged or dangerous. That was our job. Okay, but you're on radio contact the whole time. Any problems, any weird feelings, you come down immediately. Roger that, boss. I watched Tony start up the first pitch of ecstasy. He was a beautiful climber. Smooth, confident, never wasting motion. The route began with some tricky finger holds, then moved into a section of small crimps that required serious strength. For the first 100 feet, everything looked normal. Tony called out his progress, told me about the condition of the rock, made jokes about Jake's ghost climbers. Then he reached the section with the chalk marks. Rebecca. His voice came through the radio, quiet and strange. These marks, they're not painted on. What do you mean? I mean they're real chalk, fresh chalk, and they're on holds that... Tony went silent for a long moment. Rebecca, there are no holds here, but the chalk is exactly where someone would grab if holds existed. I felt something cold move through my chest, despite the blazing heat. Tony, come down, now. Wait, there's more. The rock is warm here, like body temperature, and I can smell something weird. What kind of smell? Old leather. And gunpowder, maybe? Like someone fired a gun up here recently. That's when I heard it. Just for a second, so quiet I almost missed it. The sound of metal clanking against rock, like climbing gear. But Tony was the only person on the cliff. Tony, are you moving your gear? No, I'm just hanging here looking at these marks. The metal clanking sound came again, louder this time. And it was coming from above Tony, not from his position. Tony, get down here right now. I could hear the fear in my own voice, and that scared me more than anything else. In 16 years, I'd never lost control during a rescue situation. But this wasn't a rescue situation. This was something else entirely. Okay, I'm coming down. Tony's voice was shaky now too. But Rebecca, there's one more thing. What? The chalk marks go higher, way higher, all the way to the top of the cliff, and some of them are still wet. As Tony rappelled down, I stared up at the impossible chalk marks and wondered what the hell was climbing on my mountain. 2 days later, Tommy Spider Rodriguez showed up at the ranger station. Tommy was one of the best free climbers on the East Coast, the kind of guy who could scale walls that looked impossible to the rest of us. He was also cocky as hell, which had always worried me. Heard you folks got some ghost problems, Tommy said with a grin that showed too many teeth. We don't have ghost problems, Tony said quickly. We have some unusual chalk marks that we're investigating. Uh-huh. Tommy looked at both of us like we were children. And I heard Jake Mitchell saw some speed demons racing up your cliffs. The word speed demons made something twist in my stomach. It was exactly how I would describe what Jake had seen, though he'd never used those words. Tommy, the climbing area is closed pending safety assessment, I said. Come on, Rebecca, you know me. I've been climbing these rocks since I was 15. If something weird is going on, I can handle it. That was the problem with guys like Tommy. They always thought they could handle anything, right up until they couldn't. Look, I'll make you a deal, Tommy said. Let me take a look at your mysterious chalk marks. If I can't explain them, I'll leave. But if it's just some kind of natural phenomenon or prank, you reopen the climbing area. Tony and I looked at each other. We both knew Tommy wouldn't leave without getting what he wanted. And honestly, part of me wanted to see what he'd find. Okay, I said. But you climb with radio contact and backup rope. And if I tell you to come down, you come down. Deal. An hour later, we were back at the base of Ecstasy. The chalk marks were still there, looking even stranger in the afternoon light. But there was something new. More marks, higher up, like someone had been climbing during the night. Tommy studied the cliff through binoculars for a long time without saying anything. Well, Tony asked. That's not possible, Tommy said quietly. What's not possible? Those upper marks. They're on a section that overhangs about 15 degrees. You can't climb an overhang without holds, no matter how good you are. So it's a prank, Tony said. Has to be. Tommy shook his head. Look at the pattern. Whoever made these marks was actually climbing. You can see the sequence. Right hand, right foot, left foot. It follows the natural movement of a body going up the wall. But there are no holds, I said. But there are no holds, Tommy agreed. Which means either someone invented a new kind of climbing that defies physics, or... He trailed off. Or what? Or Jake's speed demons are real. Tommy started up the cliff without waiting for permission. He was even better than Tony, flowing up the rock like water, making impossible moves look easy. But when he reached the section with the chalk marks, he stopped. This is insane. His voice crackled through the radio. The marks are exactly where I want to put my hands, but there's nothing here. It's like someone was climbing a ghost route. Tommy, come down, I said. Wait, I want to try something. Maybe there are holds here that are just really subtle. Tommy, no. But it was too late. I watched through my binoculars as Tommy tried to follow the chalk marks, reaching for holds that didn't exist. For a moment, it almost looked like it was working. His hand found something, and he pulled himself higher. Then his foot slipped, and he fell. The rope caught him after 20 feet, leaving him spinning in the air, cursing and shaking his head. Okay, he called down. That was weird. What happened? For just a second there, it felt like there were holds, like I was grabbing onto something solid. But when I looked down at my hands, they were just pressed against smooth rock. Tommy rappelled down, looking shaken. When he reached the ground, he couldn't meet my eyes. Rebecca, I've been climbing for 20 years. I've never felt anything like that. What do you mean? It was like the rock wanted me to fall, like it was fighting me. He looked up at the chalk marks. And there's something else. While I was hanging there, I heard voices. Tony and I exchanged glances. What kind of voices? Men calling out commands, military style. But the words were old-fashioned, like Civil War reenactors or something. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Seneca Rocks had been used as a signal station during the Civil War. Confederate soldiers had been stationed at the top of the cliffs to watch for Union troop movements. According to local history, 8 of them had fallen to their deaths trying to maintain the signal station during a winter storm in 1863. Tommy, I want you to stay away from this area until we figure out what's going on. For once, Tommy didn't argue. He packed his gear in silence and left without his usual cocky jokes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chalk marks, about Tommy's description of holds that weren't there, about voices giving military commands. Around midnight, I gave up and drove back to the cliff. The moon was almost dark, making it hard to see anything clearly. But as I sat in my truck, staring up at the rock face, I saw them. Dark Shepham, as moving up the cliff, fast, impossibly fast. I grabbed my binoculars, but the shapes were too dark and moving too quickly for me to make out details. They flowed up the rock like liquid, shadow, covering in seconds what should have taken expert climbers hours to complete. And they were climbing the exact route marked by the chalk handprints. I sat there for 2 hours, watching the shadows race up and down the cliff face. Sometimes there were 2 or 3 of them, sometimes just one. They moved without ropes, without rest, without any regard for the laws of physics. Around 3 a.m., they disappeared. The next morning, there were new chalk marks, lots of them. And at the base of the cliff, I found something that made my blood run cold. An old piece of climbing rope, hand-woven hemp, the kind they might have used during the Civil War. It was rotted with age, but parts of it looked fresh, like it had been used recently. I was still staring at the rope when Tony arrived for the morning shift. Rebecca, what are you doing here so early? I held up the rope. Found this at the base of Ecstasy. Tony examined it, frowning. This thing's ancient. Must have been left by some historical reenactors or something. But I knew better. The rope was old enough to be authentic, and the fresh wear marks on it suggested it had been used for climbing by ghosts of Confederate soldiers who had been trying to reach their signal station for more than a century. "Tony," I said, "I think we need to call in some help." "What kind of help?" "The kind that knows about Civil War history, because I think our speed demons are Confederate soldiers, and they're still trying to complete their mission." Dr. Henry Battlefield arrived the next day with a carload of old books and a head full of Civil War history. He was a professor at West Virginia University, and his specialty was military signal systems. When I told him about the chalk marks and the shadow climbers, he didn't laugh or suggest I was seeing things. Instead, he asked to see the rope. "Hand-woven hemp, authentic period construct. Iron," he said after examining it carefully. "And look at these wear marks. This rope has been used for climbing, probably many times." "But it's over 100 years old," Tony said. "Yes, it is. Which brings us to an interesting historical fact." Dr. Battlefield pulled out an old photograph showing Seneca Rocks from 1863. The Confederate Army established a signal station at the top of these cliffs. 8 soldiers were assigned to maintain communication with forces in the valley below. "What happened to them?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. "They died in a winter storm trying to send one final message. According to records, they were attempting to signal a retreat order when the storm hit. All 8 fell from the cliff face." Dr. Battlefield looked up at the impossible chalk marks. "The retreat message was never sent. Hundreds of Confederate soldiers died in an ambush that could have been avoided." "So you think they're still trying to send the message?" Tony sounded skeptical. "I think," Dr. Battlefield said carefully, "that some duties transcend death, especially when failure means the death of your fellow soldiers." That afternoon, we set up observation equipment at the base of the cliff. Dr. Battlefield wanted to document whatever was happening, and Tony was determined to prove there was a rational explanation. I just wanted everyone to stay safe. As the sun went down, we waited. The temperature was still in the 90s, making the air shimmer with heat waves. At first, I thought that's all we were seeing, distortions caused by rising hot air. Then the shadows started moving. "Jesus Christ," Tony whispered. 3 dark figures were flowing up the cliff face. In the fading light, I could make out more details than I had the night before. They wore what looked like Confederate gray uniforms, and they carried equipment, ropes, signal mirrors, even what might have been a flag. But the most terrifying thing was their speed. They were covering the 900-foot cliff in less than 10 minutes, moving up sections that should have been impossible for anyone to climb. "They're racing," Dr. Battlefield said quietly. "Look at them. They're competing with each other." He was right. The shadow figures were definitely trying to outpace each other, taking different routes up the cliff face. It was like watching some kind of supernatural climbing competition. "But racing to what?" I asked. "To the signal station. They're still trying to be the first to reach the top and send the retreat message." As we watched, one of the shadow figures pulled ahead of the others. He took a direct route straight up the most difficult section of the cliff, moving with impossible grace and speed. But just as he reached the final overhang before the summit, something went wrong. The shadow figure fell. But instead of dropping to the ground, he simply faded away, like smoke dissipating in the wind. A few seconds later, new chalk marks appeared at the base of the cliff, and he started climbing again. "They're stuck in a loop," Dr. Battlefield said. "They keep trying to complete their mission, but something prevents them from reaching the top." "What could prevent them?" Tony asked. Before Dr. Battlefield could answer, we heard footsteps behind us. I turned to see Martinez approaching with his climbing gear. "Tony, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "I'm going to race them," he said simply. "You're going to what?" "Look at them, Rebecca. They're not evil or trying to hurt anyone. They're just soldiers trying to do their duty. And I'm a better climber than anyone who was around in 1863. Tony's eyes were bright with excitement. "If I can beat them to the top, maybe I can help them complete their mission." "Tony, that's insane. You don't know what will happen if you interact with them." But Tony was already putting on his harness. "I've been thinking about this all day. These soldiers have been trapped here for over a century, failing at the same mission over and over. Maybe they just need someone with modern climbing skills to show them the way." "Martinez, stand down," I ordered. "That's a direct command." Tony looked at me with something close to pity. Rebecca, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. How many people get the chance to help Civil War ghosts complete their unfinished business? Before I could stop him, Tony started up the cliff. At first he climbed normally, following established routes and using proper technique. But as he got higher, something changed. His movements became faster, more fluid. He started taking risks that no sane climber would attempt, jumping between holds, trusting his weight to tiny crimps that shouldn't have supported him. "Tony, slow down," I called through the radio. "Can't slow down," his voice crackled back. "They're gaining on me." I looked up to see that the shadow figures had noticed Tony. Instead of ignoring him, they seemed to be reacting to his presence. Two of them had altered their routes to climb alongside him, as if accepting his challenge to race. "This is bad," Dr. Battlefield muttered. Tony was now climbing at an inhuman pace, keeping up with the supernatural soldiers. But his body wasn't designed for that kind of speed and stress. Through my binoculars, I could see his face was pale and strained, his movements becoming jerky and desperate. "Martinez, abort the climb. Come down immediately." "Almost there," Tony gasped. "Just need to reach the top. Send the signal." But as Tony approached the same overhang where the shadow figure had fallen, I realized what was happening. The Confederate soldiers weren't just trying to complete their mission. They were challenging any skilled climber to try to beat them, and anyone who accepted the challenge would be pushed beyond human limitations. Tommy Rodriguez had felt it when he tried. He had to follow the chalk marks, the compulsion to climb harder, faster, beyond what was safe or possible. "Tony, they're not trying to help you," I shouted. "They're trying to make you race. Them to death." But it was too late. Tony reached the final overhang, the same spot where the shadow figure had fallen. For a moment he hung there, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Then his strength gave out. He fell 90 feet before his rope caught him. The impact slammed him against the cliff face with a sickening crack. "Tony!" I was already grabbing my rescue gear. "Dr. Battlefield, call for a helicopter." As I rappelled down to reach Tony, I could see the shadow figures continuing their eternal race up the cliff face. They had ignored his fall completely, too focused on their own impossible mission to care about the human climber they had just destroyed. Tony was unconscious when I reached him, blood streaming from a head wound. But he was alive. As the rescue helicopter airlifted Tony to the hospital, I stared up at the chalk marks covering the cliff face and realized something terrifying. The Confederate soldiers weren't trying to complete their mission anymore. They were trying to find a living climber skilled enough to beat them in their eternal race, and they wouldn't stop until they found one. Tony survived, but barely. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and a shattered left wrist that would never work quite right again. When he was conscious enough to talk, the first thing he said was, "I almost had them, Rebecca. I was so close." That's when I knew we were dealing with something worse than ghost soldiers. We were dealing with a supernatural obsession that could infect living people. Dr. Battlefield and I spent the next day researching everything we could find about the Confederate signal station. What we learned made the situation even more dangerous. The 8 soldiers weren't just trying to send any retreat message, Dr. Battlefield explained as we sat in the hospital waiting room. They were trying to signal a specific code, 3 long flashes, 2 short ones repeated 5 times. It was the emergency code for retreat immediately, enemy force superior. And if they had sent it, a Confederate regiment of 400 men would have avoided walking into a Union ambush. Instead, they were slaughtered to the last man. So the shadow soldiers weren't just trapped by their own deaths. They were trapped by the weight of 400 additional deaths they could have prevented. "There's more," Dr. Battlefield said. "I found records of other incidents over the years. Unexplained climbing accidents, always involving skilled climbers who pushed themselves beyond safe limits. It goes back decades." "How many people have they killed?" "Hard to say, but every few years someone dies on these cliffs in a way that doesn't make sense. Experienced climbers making impossible mistakes, attempting routes beyond their skill level." I thought about Tommy Rodriguez, about how confident he'd been, how certain he could handle anything, about Tony's obsession with racing the shadows. "They're not just trying to complete their mission," I said. "They're trying to find someone good enough to beat them. Someone who can climb fast enough and skilled enough to reach the signal station first. And every time they find a skilled climber, they push them to attempt something impossible. That night, despite Dr. Battlefield's protests, I went back to the cliff alone. Not to climb. I wasn't stupid enough to think I could outrace supernatural soldiers, but I needed to understand what they wanted. As the shadows began their nightly race up the cliff face, I set up the most powerful spotlight I could find and aimed it at the top of the rocks. If these soldiers needed to send a signal, maybe I could help them do it without killing anyone else. The shadow figures noticed the light immediately. Instead of continuing their race, they stopped and stared down at me. For the first time, I could see them clearly. They were young men, most of them probably in their 20s. They wore Confederate gray uniforms that were torn and weathered, and they carried the equipment of 19th century soldiers: rope, signal mirrors, a folded flag. Their faces were gaunt and desperate, with the look of men who had been failing at the same task for more than a century. One of them, taller than the others, probably an officer, began descending the cliff. Not racing this time, but moving with careful, deliberate purpose. When he reached the ground, I could see that he was translucent but solid-looking, like a person seen through dirty glass. He stood about 10 feet away from me, studying my face with eyes that held more sadness than any human being should have to carry. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Are you here to race?" "No," I said. "I'm here to help you send your signal." The ghost soldier's face showed the first expression other than desperate determination I'd seen from any of them. "Help us? You need to signal a retreat, right? 3 long flashes, 2 short ones, repeated 5 times?" "Yes, ma'am. But we can't reach the station. Every time we try, we fall. Every time we fall, we must start again." "What if someone else sent the signal for you?" The soldier looked confused. "Only a Confederate Signal Corps member can send official military communications." "But you're all dead," I said as gently as possible. "You've been dead for over a century. The war is over. The men you were trying to warn are already dead too." The soldier shook his head violently. "No, we failed. The regiment is still waiting for our signal. They're still walking into the ambush because we failed." That's when I understood. The ghost soldiers weren't just trapped by duty. They were trapped by guilt. They believed that somewhere, somewhen, their fellow soldiers were still dying because of their failure. "Listen to me," I said. "What if I could prove to you that your message was received? That the men you were trying to save were warned? How could you prove such a thing?" I thought quickly. "If I can send your signal from the station at the top of the cliff using modern equipment, would that complete your mission?" The soldier considered this for a long moment. "You would do this? Race us to the top and send the signal in our place?" "I'm not racing you anywhere, but I have equipment that can send light signals much more powerful than anything you had in 1863. I can send your message." "But you must reach the signal station," the soldier insisted. "The message must be sent from the proper location." I looked up at the 900-foot cliff face. Even with modern climbing gear, it would take me hours to reach the top safely. And I'd be doing it alone at night while ghost soldiers raced around me. "Okay," I said. "I'll climb to the signal station and send your message. But I need you and your men to stop racing. Stop trying to make living people compete with you. Can you do that?" The soldier nodded slowly. "If you can complete our mission, we will have no need to race." I started climbing at first light, with the most powerful signal lamp I could find strapped to my pack. Dr. Battlefield waited at the base of the cliff with radio contact and emergency backup. The ghost soldiers climbed alongside me, but for the first time in over a century, they weren't racing. They moved at my pace, watching as I carefully made my way up routes they had been trying to speed climb for generations. "You climb differently than the others," the soldier officer said, as we rested on a ledge halfway up. "How so?" "The others who accepted our challenge, they tried to climb like us, fast, without fear, beyond their mortal limitations. You climb like someone who wants to live." "That's because I do want to live, and I want you to stop killing people who are just trying to help you." The soldier looked ashamed. We did not mean to harm the living. We only wanted to find someone skilled enough to complete our mission. It took me 6 hours to reach the top of the cliff. When I finally pulled myself over the edge, I found the ruins of the old Confederate signal station, just a few stones and some rotted wooden posts. But the view was perfect for sending signals down into the valley. The ghost soldiers gathered around me as I set up the signal lamp. In the daylight, they looked even more translucent, like they were fading away. The code is 3 long, 2 short, repeated 5 times? I asked. Yes, ma'am. I pointed the powerful electric lamp toward the valley and began flashing the retreat signal. 3 long beams, 2 short ones. Over and over, 5 complete repetitions. When I finished, something strange happened. The air around the signal station began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. And in that shimmer, I could see other figures, dozens of Confederate soldiers in the valley below, stopping their advance as they saw the signal flashes. The ghost soldiers saw it too. The officer saluted the vision with tears streaming down his translucent face. The message is received, he whispered. The regiment retreats. Our brothers live. One by one, the ghost soldiers began to fade away, their century-long vigil finally complete. The officer was the last to go. Thank you, he said. We can rest now. And then they were gone. I climbed down from Seneca Rocks as the sun was setting, tired but alive. The cliff face looked different somehow, cleaner, less oppressive. The chalk marks were gone, and the rock felt like just rock again, not a supernatural battleground. Dr. Battlefield met me at the base with a huge grin and a thermos of coffee. Did it work? He asked. It worked. They're gone. All of them? All of them. We drove back to the ranger station in comfortable silence. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I felt sad. Those young soldiers had been trapped for over a century by a sense of duty and guilt, unable to, accept that their deaths weren't their fault. Tony was released from the hospital 2 days later. His wrist would never be quite right, and he couldn't climb at the level he used to. But he was alive, and after what I'd seen happen to skilled climbers who encountered the shadow soldiers, that was more than we had any right to expect. Do you think they're really at peace? He asked as we sat in the ranger station, looking out at the cliffs. I think so. The mission is complete. The message was sent. But to who? Those soldiers died 150 years ago. I'd been thinking about that. Maybe time doesn't work the way we think it does. Maybe there's some part of the universe where those 400 men are still alive, still walking toward that ambush. And maybe now they've been warned. Tony nodded slowly. That's a comforting thought. Yeah, it is. The climbing area reopened a week later, with no mention in the official report of ghost soldiers or supernatural racing competitions. We attributed the temporary closure to rock stability concerns and left it at that. But I kept thinking about what the officer had told me, that other skilled climbers had accepted their challenge over the years. How many people had died because of the Confederate soldiers' supernatural obsession? How many families had lost sons and daughters to what looked like climbing accidents but were really supernatural competitions? I started researching other Civil War sites, looking for patterns of unusual accidents or unexplained deaths. What I found kept me awake at night. There were dozens of them, battlefields where reenactors died in historically accurate accidents, signal stations where radio operators were found dead with antique equipment, even a few cases where park rangers at Civil War sites had died under circumstances that didn't quite make sense. It seemed like the soldiers at Seneca Rocks were unique. All over the country, there were Civil War ghosts still trying to complete unfinished missions, still looking for living people skilled enough to help them succeed where they had failed, and most of them were still dangerous. 6 months after the incident at Seneca Rocks, I received a phone call from a park ranger at Antietam National Battlefield in Maryland. Ranger Ironwood, this is going to sound crazy, but we've got some Civil War reenactors here who say they're being challenged to duels by Confederate ghosts. They claim the ghosts won't let them leave until someone beats them in sword combat. I sighed and reached for my calendar. I'll be there tomorrow. Because apparently my new job wasn't just rescuing people from cliffs. It was helping finish a war that had been over for more than a century. The shadow soldiers of Seneca Rocks were at peace. But there were other ghosts out there, still fighting battles that would never end unless someone helped them complete their final missions. And for reasons I didn't fully understand, that someone seemed to be me. I never climb at Seneca Rocks anymore. Not because I'm afraid of ghosts. They're gone now. But because every time I look at those cliff faces, I remember how close Tony came to joining them in their eternal, impossible race. Some competitions aren't worth winning, and some duties are too heavy for the living to carry. But sometimes, if you're very careful and very lucky, you can help the dead finally lay down their burdens and rest. My name is Samuel Greystone, and I've been a park ranger at Canaan Valley Resort State Park for 19 years. That's long enough to know the difference between a bear print and a boot print, between wind in the trees and something that shouldn't be there. Long enough to laugh at campfire stories about wild children living in the woods like animals. I used to be an elementary school teacher before this job. Spent 8 years in classrooms with kids aged 6 to 12, so I know how children think, how they move, how they survive. That's why the Park Service put me in charge of youth education programs and family camping safety. Parents trust me with their kids because I understand them. I have 3 children of my own. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Canaan Valley first, because the place itself is part of this story. We sit at 3,200 feet above sea level in the mountains of West Virginia. This valley is the highest major valley east of the Mississippi River, and in March, when this all happened, it's a wet, muddy mess. Spring thaw turns everything into swampland. The main roads flood. Cell phone towers can't reach through the fog that rolls in thick as soup. When you're down here during flood season, you're cut off from everything. The nearest hospital is 29 miles away on good roads, and in March, there are no good roads. The valley has history, too. Back in the 1920s, this whole area was logged clean. They built company towns, brought in families, set up schools for the workers' children. Most of those old settlements are gone now, swallowed up by new forest growth. But sometimes you find pieces, a foundation here, some rusted equipment there. And if you know where to look, you can still see the old logging roads that snake through places no modern truck could go. March 15th, 1985. That's when it started. The Kowalski family was camp, in Site 14, down by the wetlands. Nice family from Pittsburgh, mom, dad, 2 girls aged 8 and 10. They came to me that morning looking worried. "Ranger Greystone," Mrs. Kowalski said, "we heard children calling for help last night, from way out in the swamp area where you said not to go." I nodded and got out my incident report form. This happened sometimes. Kids would wander off, get turned around, end up calling for their parents. Usually we found them within an hour, scared but safe. "What time did you hear this?" I asked. "Around midnight," Mr. Kowalski said. "At first we thought it might be our girls playing a trick, but they were both in the tent with us, sound asleep." "Could you tell how many children?" "That's the thing," Mrs. Kowalski said, glancing at her husband. "It sounded like a whole group of them, maybe 10 or 12 voices, all calling and laughing like they were playing some kind of game." I wrote this down, but I wasn't worried yet. Sound carries strange in the valley, especially with all the fog. What seems like 12 voices might be 2 kids echoing off the rock walls. "We'll check it out," I promised them. Probably some teenagers camping without permits. But when I walked out to the swamp area that afternoon with my partner Thompson, we found something that made me pause. Children's footprints in the mud, all right. Fresh ones, probably from the night before. But they were small, really small. The biggest couldn't have belonged to a kid over 10 years old, and they led straight into the deep swamp where no child should be able to walk. "Look at this," Thompson said, crouching down by the water's edge. "These prints go right into the bog. But there's no way a kid could walk through that mess without sinking." He was right. The swampland in that area is dangerous even for adults with proper equipment. The mud can swallow you up, to your waist in seconds. The water is cold enough to kill you in minutes. No child could cross it and live. Maybe they went around, I suggested. But even as I said it, I was looking at Badiats, the prints. They didn't curve around the bog. They went straight in, like the children had simply walked across the surface of the water. We followed the edge of the swamp for about a quarter mile, looking for where the kids might have come out on the other side. We never found any exit tracks. It was like they had just disappeared into the water. Weird, Thompson said, but he was already losing interest. Thompson had been a ranger for only 3 years, and he still thought every mystery had a simple answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those small footprints leading into deep water, about the Kowalski family hearing children's voices from an area where children shouldn't be able to survive. I got up around 2 in the morning and walked out to my porch. The ranger station sits on a small hill that looks down over the whole valley. On clear nights, you can see for miles. It wasn't a clear night. The fog was thick enough to cut with a knife, but as I stood there, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Children laughing. Not the happy laughter of kids playing games. This was different. Wild laughter, like animals might make if they could laugh. And it was coming from deep in the swamp, from places where no human being should be able to stand. I listened for maybe 10 minutes. The laughter would fade away, then start up again from a completely different direction, like the children were running in circles around the whole valley, running through areas that should have been impossible to cross. That's when I started to wonder if maybe the old stories about wild children living in these mountains weren't just stories after all. The next morning brought more reports. The Henderson family in Site 22 said their cooler had been opened during the night. Not broken into, opened. The latches were carefully undone, and half their food was missing. But they'd used a bear-proof container, the kind that takes 2 people and strong hands to open. Someone knew exactly how to work the mechanism, Mr. Henderson told me. But they only took certain things, all the sweet stuff, cookies, fruit snacks, candy bars, left all the canned goods and adult food. I filed another report, but I was starting to see a pattern. Children's voices in the night. Children's footprints leading into impossible places. Now, children's food preferences from a locked container that should have been impossible for kids to open. Thompson and I spent the day investigating, but we didn't find much. A few more small footprints in the mud, some scratches on trees at about shoulder height for a 10-year-old, and something else that bothered me, the complete absence of normal wildlife sounds in certain areas of the valley. You notice how quiet it gets by the old logging road? I asked Thompson as we walked back to the station. He stopped and listened. Even the frogs had stopped croaking. The whole swamp was silent except for our footsteps. Maybe we're spooking the animals, he said. But I knew better. In 19 years of working in these woods, I'd learned that animals go quiet for only 2 reasons. When a big predator is hunting nearby, or when something unnatural is in their territory. That afternoon, I decided to do some research. I drove to the county library in Davis and asked to see the old newspaper files from the 1920s. If there really were children living wild in the valley, maybe there was a historical explanation. What I found made me wish I'd never started looking. March 18th, 1925. 60 years ago, almost to the day. The headline read, 17 children die in logging camp school fire. The article was short, but the details were horrible. A 1-room schoolhouse in the valley had caught fire during a late winter storm, the teacher had tried to evacuate the children, but the storm had knocked down trees that blocked both exits. 17 children, ages 6 to 12, had died from smoke inhalation. But here's the part that made my hands shake as I read it. The bodies of only 11 children were ever found. 6 were listed as missing, presumed dead, their remains lost in the fire's destruction. The article mentioned that some logging families reported hearing children's voices in the woods for weeks after the fire. The voices always came from the deep swamp areas, places too dangerous to search properly. Eventually, the logging company shut down operations and moved out. The voices stopped, and people assumed it had just been the grief and guilt of the survivors imagining things. I drove back to the valley that evening with a sick feeling in my stomach. 17 children had died in a fire 60 years ago. 6 bodies were never found, and now families were reporting children's voices coming from the same areas where search parties couldn't go. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence, but when I got back to the ranger station, Thompson was waiting for me with something that made coincidence impossible. "You need to see what I found," he said, and he led me out to the old logging road that ran along the east side of the valley. About a quarter-mile in, hidden by new-growth trees and accessible only by a path that barely qualified as a deer trail, Thompson had discovered something that shouldn't exist. It was a shelter, but not the kind of shelter you'd expect from homeless people or teenage campers. This was primitive, built from materials that looked like they'd been scavenged over decades. Old wooden planks that might have come from the logging camp buildings, pieces of metal roofing, green with age. And inside, arranged carefully on makeshift shelves, were dozens of items that didn't belong together. Modern camping gear mixed with things that were clearly very old. A Coleman lantern from maybe the 1980s sitting next to a child's lunchbox that looked like it was from the 1920s. Canned food with current expiration dates next to glass jars that were covered in rust and dirt. But what really got my attention were the clothes. Children's clothes, in sizes that would fit kids from maybe 6 to 12 years old. Some were clearly recent. A Mickey Mouse t-shirt, a pair of sneakers that couldn't be more than a few years old. But others looked like they'd been there for decades. A little girl's dress with a pattern I recognized from old family photos. A boy's knickers and suspenders like children wore 60 years ago. "Thompson," I said, my voice coming out as barely a whisper. "Where did you find this?" "Just stumbled across it while following those footprints we saw yesterday," he said. "Looks like it's been here for years, maybe decades." I walked closer to the shelter, and that's when I saw something that made me step back fast. On one of the wooden planks, scratched into the surface with what might have been a nail or a sharp stick, were words. Child's handwriting, but faded with age. "Teacher said run, fire too hot, can't find way out." Below that, in fresher scratches that looked maybe a few years old, "Still running, still looking for safe place." Thompson saw me staring at the writing and came over to look. "What do you think it means?" he asked. Before I could answer, we both heard something that made us freeze. Children's voices, singing. The song was coming from deeper in the woods, maybe 100 yards away. But I recognized the tune. It was "Ring Around the Rosie," but the words were wrong. Instead of "ashes, ashes, we all fall down," the voices were singing, "Fire, fire, we all run now. Fire, fire, we can't get out." The singing got louder, like the children were moving toward us through the trees, but I couldn't see anyone. The woods were thick with fog, and the light was starting to fade. "We should go," I said, grabbing Thompson's arm. But he was just standing there, listening to the singing with a strange expression on his face. "They sound scared," he said. "They sound like they need help." That's when I knew we were in real trouble, because Thompson was right. The voices did sound scared. They sounded like children who were lost and frightened and calling for adults to save them. And every instinct I had as a father, as someone who had spent his career protecting children, was screaming at me to follow those voices and help. But my 19 years as a ranger, my knowledge of these woods and their dangers, was telling me something else entirely. Those voices were coming from the deep swamp, from places where no living child could survive, which meant that whatever was calling to us wasn't alive at all. The singing followed us all the way back to the main trail, not getting closer, but not fading away either, like the children were pacing us through the trees, staying just out of sight. Thompson kept stopping to listen, and each time he did, I had to grab his arm and pull him along. "We should help them," he kept saying. "They sound lost." "Thompson, think about it," I said as we finally reached the ranger station. Children's voices coming from a swamp where children can't survive. Right after I find out about 17 kids who died in a fire 60 years ago in the exact same area. But Thompson wasn't really listening. He was looking back toward the woods with that same strange expression. Over the next 3 days, things got worse. The Kowalski family packed up and left after their 8-year-old daughter said she saw children watching their tent from the tree line. They had big bright eyes, she told me before they drove away, and they were wearing old-fashioned clothes like in my history book. The Henderson family left too, after they woke up one morning to find their campfire had been built back up during the night. Someone had arranged their camping chairs in a circle around the fire, like children preparing for story time, but when they checked, though their camping supplies were still properly stored and locked away. 2 more families reported hearing children's laughter during the night, always coming from the direction of the deep swamp. And Thompson was getting strange. I found him leaving food by the old logging road where we'd discovered the shelter. Granola bars, juice boxes, cookies, the kind of snacks you'd give to hungry children. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "They're hungry," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You heard them singing. They're scared and hungry, and they've been hiding in the woods for God knows how long." "Thompson, those aren't real children." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Of course they're real. We've seen their footprints. We found their shelter. We've heard them calling for help." I tried to explain about the school fire, about the 6 missing children whose bodies were never found, but Thompson had an answer for everything. "Maybe they survived," he said. "Maybe they've been living wild in the woods all this time. For 60 years, Thompson, they'd be in their 70s by now. Maybe it's their children, or their children's children." He was so convinced that I almost started to believe him. Almost. But then I remembered the writing on the shelter wall. "Still running, still looking for safe place." That wasn't something written by descendants of the fire victims. That was written by the same children who had died in 1925. On the 4th night, Thompson didn't come back to the station. I found him the next morning at the shelter in the woods. He was sitting cross-legged in front of the primitive building surrounded by empty food containers. Granola bar wrappers, juice boxes, cookie packages, enough food for a dozen children. "They came," he said when he saw me. His voice was excited, like a kid on Christmas morning. "They finally trusted me and saw him. Ought to come eat." "Thompson, you've been out here all night. It's 40 degrees and you don't have proper gear." But he seemed fine, not cold, not tired. If anything, he looked more energetic than I'd seen him in months. "They told me their names," he said. "Lucy and James and Sarah and Michael. They're just children, Sam. They're scared and they've been hiding for so long." "What did they look like?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Small," Thompson said. "About 6 to 12 years old, like you'd expect. Their clothes are old and worn, but they take care of each other. They've learned to survive." "Thompson, did you actually see them, or did you just hear voices?" He hesitated for just a moment. "I saw them in the moonlight. They move fast, and they're shy. But they're real, Sam. They're real, and they need our help." I persuaded him to come back to the station with me, but I could tell he was already planning to return. He kept talking about the children, about how they'd been abandoned and forgotten, about how someone needed to take care of them. That afternoon, I called my supervisor in Charleston and requested backup. I told him we had a situation with a ranger who was having psychological issues, possibly related to isolation and stress. But before the backup could arrive, everything went to hell. The Hartwell family had driven up from Virginia for a weekend camping trip. Mom, Dad, and their 8-year-old daughter, Katie. They seemed like experienced campers, so I assigned them to Site 18, which was a little more isolated than the main camping area, but had a beautiful view of the valley. I should have known better. Around midnight, Katie Hartwell disappeared from her family's tent. Her parents woke up around 2 in the morning and found her sleeping bag empty. No sign of struggle, no indication that she'd been taken by force. She had simply vanished. We organized a search party immediately. Me, Thompson, Mr. Hartwell, and 2 volunteers from other camping families. But Thompson seemed to know exactly where to look. He led us straight to the deep swamp area, to places where I'd told him repeatedly that no child could survive. "She's with them," he kept saying. "The children found her, and they're keeping her safe." "Thompson, that swamp will kill an adult with proper equipment. An 8-year-old girl in pajamas wouldn't last 10 minutes. But he just smiled at me like I didn't understand something important. We heard Katie's voice around dawn. She was singing the same song we'd heard before. "Ring Around the Rosie" with the wrong words. But she wasn't alone. There were other voices with her, maybe a dozen children all singing together. The sound was coming from deep in the swamp, from an area that was basically a floating bog. No solid ground for hundreds of yards in any direction. "Katie!" her father shouted. "Katie, come back!" The singing stopped for a moment, then started up again. But now it sounded farther away, like the children were moving deeper into the swamp. Thompson started walking toward the water. "Thompson, stop," I said. "You can't go in there." "She needs help," he said. "They all need help. Someone has to take care of them." He was waist deep in the bog before I could stop him. The cold water should have shocked him, made him come to his senses. But he just kept walking, following the sound of children's voices that were leading him toward the deepest part of the swamp. "Thompson, come back! The water's too deep!" But he was already in over his head, and he was still trying to walk forward like the bog was solid ground. That's when I saw them. Children standing on the surface of the water like it was dry land. Maybe a dozen of them, all small, all wearing clothes that looked like they were from different decades. And in the middle of the group, still in her pink pajamas, was Katie Hartwell. She was standing on top of water that should have been overs, her head laughing and playing with children who had been dead for 60 years. Thompson was trying to reach them, but he was a living man in real water, and the bog was pulling him down. "Help me!" he called out, but the children just watched him struggle. They looked curious, like they couldn't understand why he couldn't walk on water like they could. I threw him a rope, pulled him back to shore. By the time I got him out, the children were gone, all of them, including Katie Hartwell. But I could still hear them singing, their voices echoing across the valley like they were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Fire, fire, we all run now. Fire, fire, we can't get out." And for the first time in 60 years, I understood what they were really saying. They were still trying to escape from a fire that had ended decades ago, still running from a burning schoolhouse, still looking for adults to save them, still calling for help from anyone who would listen. The backup team arrived that afternoon, 2 rangers from other parks and a search and rescue coordinator. But by then, the spring flood had started in earnest. The valley was cut off from the outside world, and Katie Hartwell was still missing somewhere in the deep swamp with a pack of dead children. Thompson was in shock, hypothermia, exhaustion, and something else, something like grief mixed with obsession. He kept talking about the children, about how they needed protection, about how they'd been abandoned for 60 years. "We can't just leave them out there," he said over and over. "They're just children. Someone has to take care of them." I tried to explain what I'd learned about the school fire, about the 6 children whose bodies were never found. But Thompson wouldn't listen to reason. "Even if they are ghosts," he said, "they're still children. They're still scared and alone." The search coordinator, a man named Davidson, who had 20 years of experience with missing persons cases, took charge of the operation. But when I tried to tell him what we were really dealing with, he looked at me like I was having a breakdown. "Ranger Greystone," he said, "I understand you've been under stress, but we need to focus on finding this little girl, not on ghost stories." So I stopped trying to explain. Instead, I grabbed my emergency gear and headed out to the swamp alone. If Katie Hartwell was going to survive this, someone had to understand what we were really up against. The fog was thick enough to cut with a knife. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and ice was forming around the edges of the standing water. Normal conditions would have killed a child in hours, but Katie Hartwell wasn't dealing with normal conditions. I found her around sunset, in a clearing that shouldn't have existed in the middle of the deepest part of the swamp. She was sitting around a small fire with 12 other children, all of them singing and playing like they were at summer camp. The ghost children looked exactly like Thompson had described, small, ages 6 to 12, wearing clothes from different time periods. Some had clothes that looked like they were from the 1920s, knickers and suspenders for boys, long dresses and pinafores for girls. Others wore more recent clothing, jeans and t-shirts that might have belonged to missing children from the 1960s or 70s. But their eyes all had the same look, bright and glowing, like firelight, but also ancient and sad. Katie saw me first. "Mr. Greystone," she called out, waving like nothing was wrong. "Come play with us. The other children have been teaching me games." I stepped carefully toward the clearing. The ground felt solid under my feet, but I knew that was impossible. This area should have been underwater. "Katie, your parents are worried about you. We need to get you back to camp." One of the ghost children, a boy who looked about 10, wearing clothes from the 1920s, stood up and walked toward me. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through old trees. "She's safe with us," he said. "We know how to hide from the fire." "What fire?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The fire in the cartel school," a girl with pigtails said. "It's been burning for so long. We've been running and running, but we can't find the way out." Another child, a boy with a gap-toothed smile, added, "Teacher said to run, but the doors were blocked. We found a way into the woods, but we got lost." I looked at Katie. She was listening to the ghost children with the serious expression that living children get when adults are explaining something important. "Katie, these children died a long time ago," I said gently. "They're trying to keep you safe, but they don't understand that you need different things than they do. You need warm clothes and food and your parents." "But they take care of each other," Katie said. "Lucy shares her bread, and James knows how to make the water safe to walk on." The ghost children were all looking at me now with those glowing eyes. I could see the hope in their faces, the desperate need for an adult to tell them what to do. "You've been taking care of each other for 60 years, I said to them. "You've been so brave. But the fire is over now. The school burned down a long time ago, and you don't have to keep running." "But we can still smell the smoke," the boy in knickers said. "We can still hear the teacher calling for us to evacuate." I knelt down so I was at their eye level. This was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do as an educator, as a parent, as a human being. "The smoke you smell is just from old memories," I said. "The teacher who called to you is with you now. She's been watching over you all this time, making sure you stayed together and took care of each other." I could see understanding starting to dawn in their faces. "You did everything right," I continued. "You helped each other. You stayed together. You survived as long as you could. But now it's time to stop running. It's time to rest." The ghost children looked at each other, though back at me. "Will you tell our families we were brave?" the girl with pigtails asked. "Yes," I promised. "Everyone will know how brave you were." One by one, the ghost children began to fade away. Not scary or sudden, but gently, like fog lifting in the morning sun. As they disappeared, they were smiling. The last to go was the boy in knickers, who I realized must have been one of the original 17 from the school fire. "Take care of the little one," he said, nodding toward Katie. "Make sure she gets home safe." And then they were gone. Katie and I were alone in the clearing, surrounded by dark swamp water and the sounds of normal night creatures. The impossible solid ground was gone. We were standing on a small hummock of marsh grass that barely held our weight. "Come on, Katie," I said, lifting her onto my shoulders. "Let's get you back to your parents." As we made our way back through the swamp, the real swamp, with real dangers and real cold water, Katie was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Mr. Greystone, where did the other children go?" "Home," I said. They finally went home. But behind us, from the direction of the deep swamp, I could swear I heard the faint sound of children's laughter. Not the wild, desperate laughter we'd been hearing for days. This time, it sounded happy. Katie Hartwell was reunited with her parents around midnight. She had mild hypothermia and was exhausted, but she was alive and unharmed. The local hospital kept her for observation, and by morning she was back to being a normal 8-year-old girl who wanted to tell everyone about her adventure with the old-timey children. Her parents listened politely, exchanged glances that said traumatic stress response, and made an appointment with a child psychologist for the following week. Thompson never came out of the woods. We found his body 3 days later after the floodwaters receded. He had walked into the deepest part of the swamp, the area where no living person could survive, and he had drowned trying to reach children who were no longer there. The official report listed it as an accidental death during search and rescue operations. Ranger Thompson had lost his footing in dangerous swamp conditions while looking for a missing child. I was the only one who knew the truth, that Thompson had died trying to save children who had been beyond saving for 60 years. The backup team stayed for a week to help with the investigation and cleanup. They found the primitive shelter, the old clothing, the scratched messages on the wooden planks. Davidson, the search coordinator, admitted that it was unusual, but he filed it under homeless encampment, historical significance unknown. No one else heard children's voices coming from the swamp. The valley got quiet after that. Really quiet. Not the ominous silence we'd been experiencing, but the natural quiet of a place where wild things live and grow without interference from the supernatural world. I submitted my resignation 2 weeks later. 19 years of working with children, of teaching them about wilderness safety, of protecting families in the outdoors. But I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I looked at a child, any child, I saw glowing eyes and old-fashioned clothes. I heard voices singing about fire and running and not being able to find the way out. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it, offered me a transfer, a desk job, counseling services, but I knew I was done. Those children trusted me to keep them safe, I told him. All of them, the living ones and the dead ones. And I don't know if I did the right thing. He thought I was talking about Katie Hartwell and Thompson. He didn't understand that I was talking about 17 children who died in a fire in 1925 and one ranger who died trying to save them. I took a job with the Department of Natural Resources working on trail maintenance and equipment management. No more families, no more children. Ends programs, just me in the woods and tools that make sense. But sometimes when I'm working alone on remote trails, I still hear things. Children's laughter, but happy now. The sound of kids playing games in clearings where no children have any business being. Sometimes I even hear singing. Ring around the rosy with the right words this time. I never go investigate these sounds. I've learned that some things are better left alone. Last month, I got a call from a ranger at Blackwater Falls State Park, about 50 miles from Canaan Valley. They'd found an old shelter in the woods, built from materials that looked like they'd been scavenged over decades. Inside were children's belongings from different time periods, and scratched into one of the wooden support beams was a message. Teacher said, "Run. Mill fire too hot. Can't find way home." The ranger wanted to know if I'd ever seen anything like it. I told him no, and I advised him to stay away from the shelter, especially at night. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved, but I also did some research. In 1923, there was a fire at a lumber mill near Blackwater Falls. 15 children died, most of them sons and daughters of mill workers. 7 bodies were never recovered. The mountains of West Virginia are full of places where children died in industrial accidents, mining disasters, fires in company housing. Places where families lived in poverty and children weren't properly protected because their labor was worth more than their safety. I think those children are still out there, still running from dangers that ended decades ago, still looking for adults who will tell them they're safe. Most of the time, they stay hidden. But sometimes, when conditions are right, when the fog rolls in thick and the world gets quiet, they come looking for help. My advice? If you're camping in the mountains and you hear children's voices coming from places where children shouldn't be, don't try to help. Don't follow the voices. Don't leave food. Don't think you can save them. They're beyond saving. They have been. For a long time. But if you listen carefully, if you pay attention to what they're really asking for, sometimes you can help them stop running. Sometimes you can help them go home. The children in Canaan Valley found their peace. I hope Thompson did too, in the end. I hope he understood that some kinds of protection require letting go instead of holding on. I still work in the woods, and I still love the mountains. But I work alone now, and I stay away from places where children's voices echo longer than they should. Because I've learned that the worst thing you can do to children, living or dead, is fail them when they trust you to keep them safe. And some failures follow you forever. My name is Michael Ashford, and I've been a park ranger at New River Gorge for 18 years. That's long enough to know every trail, every cliff face, and every old mine shaft in these mountains. Long enough to hear all the stories about things that go bump in the night. And long enough to know that most of those stories are just carbon monoxide hallucinations and guilty consciences. I should know about mines. My family's been digging coal out of these mountains for 3 generations. My grandfather worked the deep shafts until his lungs gave out. My father died in a cave-in when I was 12, and me? I chose the surface world, interpreting the industrial heritage sites for tourists who think mining was romantic. It wasn't romantic. It was dangerous, dirty work that killed good men. The morning everything changed started like any other September day in 1979. Fog hung thick in the gorge, turning the abandoned mining equipment into ghostly shapes. I was doing my usual patrol when I found the coal dust. Fresh coal dust. On the sealed entrance to Mine Shaft 7. The heavy steel door we'd welded shut 3 years ago was still sealed tight, but there were footprints in the black dust. Boot prints leading right up to the door and stopping, like someone had walked out of solid steel. I knelt down and touched the dust, still warm. "Hey, Mike!" I turned to see Rodriguez jogging up the trail. He'd only been working the gorge for 6 months, fresh out of college with a degree in history and a head full of romantic ideas about coal mining. "You see this?" I pointed to the prints. Rodriguez whistled low. "Looks like someone's been poking around. Maybe we got vagrants living in the old tunnels?" "Can't be," I said. "This shaft's been sealed since '76. No way in or out." But even as I said it, I was thinking about what the hiker had told me yesterday. Old guy, been walking these trails for 20 years. Said he'd met some coal-covered men near the mine entrance. Said they offered him work. Good-paying work, underground. I'd figured it was heat stroke. Now I wasn't so sure. "We should check the other sealed entrances," Rodriguez said. "Make sure nobody's found a way to break in." We spent the morning hiking to every sealed mine in our section. 8 shafts, all welded shut tight. And every single one had fresh coal dust on the ground, boot prints leading right up to the steel doors. By noon, my radio started acting up. Instead of the usual Park Service chatter, I kept hearing fragments of something else. Voices using old mining terms, talk about shift changes and gas levels, 1950s slang that nobody used anymore. "You hearing this?" I asked Rodriguez. He was staring at his gas detector. The thing was going crazy, showing methane levels that should have killed us both. But we were standing in open air with a good breeze. "This can't be right," he muttered. "These readings. It's like there's an active mine running right underneath us." That's when we heard it. The sound of pickaxes hitting coal. Rhythmic, steady, coming from deep underground. From Mine Shaft 7, which had been abandoned for 30 years. Rodriguez got that excited look he wore whenever he found a piece of old mining equipment. "Mike, what if there's still working areas down there? What if we found a piece of living history?" "Living history doesn't leave footprints on sealed doors," I said. But I was curious too, and my father always taught me that a good miner investigates strange sounds underground. It might mean danger. It might mean someone needs help. So we went back to Shaft 7 with cutting torches and mine safety gear. The steel door came off easier than it should have, like something on the other side was helping push it open. The tunnel beyond was dark and smelled like coal, dust, and old leather. My helmet light picked out fresh scratch marks on the walls, tool marks that looked new. "Somebody's definitely been working down here," Rodriguez whispered. We followed the main tunnel for about 50 yards before we found it. A side passage that shouldn't exist, carved with tools that should have been rusted to nothing, and hanging from a nail driven into fresh timber, still burning bright as day, was a carbide mining lamp, a 1950s carbide lamp, still burning after 30 years in a sealed mine. Rodriguez reached for it with shaking hands. This is impossible. The fuel should have run out decades ago. That's when we heard the voices, clear as day, coming from deeper in the tunnel. Men talking about the day shift, about shore work that needed finishing, about keeping the tunnel safe. We should go back, I said. Every instinct I'd learned from 18 years of mine safety was screaming danger. But Rodriguez was already walking toward the voices. Just a little farther, Mike. This could change everything we know about these mines. And against my better judgment, I followed him into the dark. The deeper we went into mine shaft 7, the stranger things got. The tunnel was in perfect condition. No water damage, no cave-ins, no rust on the metal supports. It looked like it had been maintained every day for the past 30 years. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, running my hand along a wooden beam that should have rotted long ago. Wood doesn't stay this solid in mine conditions. Rodriguez wasn't listening. He was staring at something ahead of us. Mike, look at this. I followed his light beam to a junction box mounted on the tunnel wall. An electrical junction box with wires running in both directions. The metal was polished clean, and a small, red light was blinking steadily. That's not possible, I said. We cut the power to these mines in 1975. Rodriguez opened the metal cover. Inside, everything looked brand new. Fresh copper wiring, clean connections, switches that operated smoothly when he tested them. This equipment's been maintained, he said. Recently. Look at these connections. No corrosion at all. That's when the lights came on. Every 20 feet along the tunnel, old mining lights flickered to life. Yellow bulbs in metal cages, exactly like the ones my father had described from his working days. The tunnel stretched ahead of us, bright as day. We didn't touch anything, Rodriguez said, staring at the switches in the junction box. They just turned on by themselves. From somewhere ahead came the steady sound of mining equipment. Picks hitting coal, shovels scraping stone, cartwheels rolling on metal tracks. The sounds of men working a productive shift. There's got to be a logical explanation, I said, but my voice sounded thin even to me. Maybe there's still power running to some sections. Maybe there are people working illegally down here. We followed the lighted tunnel for another 100 yards. The working sounds got louder. We could hear men talking, calling out warnings about loose rock, discussing where to set the next support beam. Then we found the time clock. It was mounted on the wall at another junction, just like in the old days. A wooden box with a metal mechanism and slots for punch cards. And it was running. The clock face showed 2:30 p.m., which matched my watch exactly. Below the clock was a wooden board with handwritten names and shift times. 23 names, all assigned to day shift. September 18th, 1952. That's 27 years ago, Rodriguez whispered. I studied the names. Some of them were familiar. Charlie Ashford, that was my father. Joe Martinez, Bill Henderson, Tommy Wright, names I'd heard in family stories about the old days. These men are all dead, I said. My father died in the cave-in of 52. Most of these others, too. Rodriguez ran his finger down the list. But look at the bottom, Mike. Shift status. In progress. Safe. Tie work continuing. Someone had written those words in fresh ink. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the tunnel ahead. Heavy boots on stone, getting closer. A man's voice called out clearly, "Charlie, you and the boys get that support beam set proper. We got visitors coming through." "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But Rodriguez was walking toward the voices. "Don't you see what this means? We've found something incredible. These could be the last surviving miners from the 1952 operations. Men who've been working down here for almost 30 years, keeping the mines operational." The 1952 operations ended with an explosion that killed 23 men, I said. Nobody survived that blast, Rodriguez. I grew up hearing about it. Then who's running this equipment? Who's maintaining these tunnels? A figure stepped into our light beam about 30 feet ahead. A man in mining clothes wearing a hard hat with a carbide lamp. His face and hands were black with coal dust, and he carried a wooden-handled pick over his shoulder. "You boys lost?" he asked in a friendly voice. This here's a working section. Dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Rodriguez stepped forward eagerly. We're park rangers, sir. We're investigating unusual activity in the abandoned mines. Are you working down here legally? The man laughed and coal dust puffed from his mouth like black smoke. Legal? Son, we've been working this shift for near 30 years. Got orders to shore up the weak spots before the mountain comes down. Still got work to finish. He looked directly at me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a scar on his left cheek from an old accident. It was my father, Charlie Ashford. Exactly like he looked in the photos from before I was born. Hello, Michael, he said. Been wondering when you'd come see us. We could use a man with your mining knowledge. This safety work's important. Keeps the mountain from crushing folks. My knees almost gave out. I reached for Rodriguez's arm, but he was staring at my fall, there with fascination instead of fear. This is incredible, Rodriguez breathed. Sir, how long have you been working down here? How have you survived all these years? My father, or whatever was wearing his face, smiled. Time works different down here, son. Got a job to do, so we do it. Mountain don't care if you're tired or hungry. Just care if you keep her from falling down. More figures appeared in the tunnel behind him. Men in mining clothes, all carrying tools, all covered in coal dust. I recognized some of their faces from old photographs. Joe Martinez, younger than he should be. Bill Henderson, who died when I was 15. Tommy Wright, who should be in his 70s if he was still alive. We always got room for good workers, my father said, especially family. You got the mining sense, Michael. Could teach the young fellow here proper safety procedures. Rodriguez stepped toward them eagerly. I'd be honored to learn from you. The historical value of your knowledge is incredible. Rodriguez, don't, I warned. But something in these men's voices was pulling at him. Something that made their offer sound reasonable, necessary, important. Just one shift, my father said. Show you how we do the safety work. Keep the mountain stable. Keep folks from getting hurt like we did. That's when I understood. These weren't survivors. These weren't living men who'd been hiding in the mines for 30 years. These were the miners who died in the 1952 explosion, still working their shift, still trying to finish the safety repairs that had gotten them killed. And they wanted Rodriguez and me to join them. Come on, Rodriguez, I said, backing toward the way we'd come. We need to go, now. But Rodriguez wasn't listening. He was staring at the ghost miners with the excitement of a man who'd just discovered buried treasure. Do you realize what we're witnessing? He said. These men have been maintaining these tunnels for decades. They're living pieces of industrial history. They're not living at all, I said. Rodriguez, look at them. Really look, but the longer I stared, the more solid they seemed. My father looked exactly like I remembered him, except for the coal dust that never seemed to settle. The other miners moved with purpose, checking equipment, discussing work assignments, acting like men on a normal shift. Got a timber support that needs setting, my father said to Rodriguez. You got strong hands. Could use your help getting it positioned right. Rodriguez practically glowed with eagerness. I studied historical mining techniques in college. I'd love to see authentic methods in practice. Rodriguez, these men died in 1952, I said. There was an explosion during safety work. It brought down half the mountain. My father's expression darkened. Ain't died yet, son. Still got work to finish. That weak spot in Tunnel C needs shoring up or the whole section comes down. Can't let that happen. Joe Martinez nodded seriously. Been working on it for, well, feels like yesterday we started. Just need to get the last support beam set proper. 27 years, I said. You've been working on this for 27 years. Bill Henderson laughed and coal dust swirled around him like smoke. Time's funny down here. Start a job, you finish it. That's what miners do. Rodriguez was already following them deeper into the tunnel. Show me the support work. I want to document your techniques. I had two choices. Leave Rodriguez with these things and get help, or follow him and try to keep him safe. Both options felt like death sentences. I followed him. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber I'd never seen on any mine survey. Work lights hung from cables, illuminating an active mining operation that shouldn't exist. Coal carts sat loaded and ready. Tools hung neatly on wooden pegs. A shift supervisor's office was carved into one wall, complete with desk, papers, and a working telephone. And everywhere, miners' words. Ked steadily. Some hauled coal, others set timber supports. Still others tested the air quality with old-fashioned canary cages. They moved with the rhythm of men who'd been doing the same job for decades. "This is Tunnel C," my father explained, pointing to a section where several men were wrestling with a heavy wooden beam. "Weak spot's been growing for years, getting ready to let go. When it does, takes out the whole mountain above." Rodriguez studied the work area with professional interest. "How do you detect weak spots without modern equipment?" "Feel it in your bones," Tommy Wright said. "Mountain talks to you if you listen. This section's been groaning for, well, since we started." I looked more closely at the work area. The support beam they were trying to set was massive, easily 8 inches square and 12 feet long. It would take a crane to position something that heavy, but these men were lifting it by hand. Dead men with supernatural strength, working to prevent a disaster that had already happened 3 decades ago. "Rodriguez," I said, "we need to leave. This isn't a historical preservation. This is something else." But Rodriguez was already grabbing the end of the support beam. "Where do you need this positioned?" The moment his hands touched the wood, he changed. Not physically, but something in his expression shifted. His eagerness took on a different quality. More focused, more compulsive. "That's it," my father said approvingly. "You got the mining sense. Can feel how the work needs doing." Rodriguez helped them maneuver the beam into position. His movements became smoother, more coordinated with the other workers, like he'd been doing this job his whole life. "Feels good to do important work," he said, and his voice sounded different. Older somehow. I grabbed his arm. "Rodriguez, we're leaving, now." He shook me off without looking away for the work. "Can't leave in the middle of a shift, Mike. This support beam's critical. If we don't get it set right, people could get hurt." "People already got hurt," I said. "In 1952, this is the work that killed them." My father walked over and put a cold, dusty hand on my shoulder. "Nobody's getting killed, son. We're preventing that. This beam goes in right, mountain stays stable. Safety first, just like I taught you." His touch felt real, warm and solid and familiar. For a moment, I almost believed him, almost thought this was just another day in the mines, doing necessary work with good men. Then I noticed Rodriguez's hands. They were aging, lines appearing around his knuckles, calluses forming from years of mining work he'd never done. His hair was getting streaks of premature gray. "What are you doing to him?" I demanded. "Teaching him the trade," Joe Martinez said. "Good worker deserves to learn proper. Time moves different when you're doing important work." Rodriguez positioned the support beam with supernatural skill, like he'd been a miner for decades. His movements matched the other workers perfectly. When the job was done, he stepped back with satisfaction. "That'll hold," he said, in a voice that carried the confidence of 30 years' experience. But when I looked at him, Rodriguez appeared to have aged 5 years in the last 5 minutes. His face was leaner, more weathered. Coal dust was ground into his skin like it had been there for years. "We're going," I said, grabbing him by the arm. This time he resisted with strength that surprised me. "Shift's not over, Mike. Still got work to do. Tunnel B needs checking for gas pockets. Could be dangerous if we don't test it proper." "Rodriguez, you're not a miner. You're a college graduate with a history degree." He looked at me with confusion, like he was trying to remember something from a long time ago. "Don't be silly, Mike. Been working these mines for... He stopped, uncertain. The other miners watched him with patient expressions. "How long have I been working here?" Rodriguez asked. "Long enough to know the job," my father said. "Come on, gas testing won't wait." As they headed toward another tunnel, I made my decision. I had to get help, had to find someone who could explain what was happening and how to stop it. I ran for the entrance, leaving Rodriguez with the dead miners who thought they were still alive. Behind me, I could hear them starting another work song, an old mining ballad about staying safe underground and always finishing your shift. Rodriguez's voice joined in, already knowing all the words. I made it to the surface just as the sun was setting. My radio still wasn't working right, just that strange chatter about shift changes and safety inspections. When I tried to call for backup, all I got was a voice reading mining safety regulations from 1952. I drove to the ranger station, but it was empty. A note on the door said the other rangers had gone to investigate unusual activity at the old mining sites. That was hours ago. Nobody had come back. I was alone with whatever was happening in the mines. By the time I gathered emergency equipment and returned to Mine Shaft 7, it was full dark. The tunnel entrance glowed with warm yellow light, and I could hear the sounds of a busy shift in full swing. Multiple voices, working songs, the rhythm of productive labor. I went back down with a heavy heart, knowing I was probably walking into a trap. But Rodriguez was down there, aging into something that wasn't quite human anymore. And my father, or the thing wearing his face, was waiting for me. The main chamber was busier than before. At least 30 miners worked steadily under the electric lights. Some faces I recognized from old photographs, others were strangers. But they all had that same coal dust coating, that same timeless quality. And there, setting support timbers with expert skill, was Rodriguez. He'd aged another 10 years, in the hours I'd been gone. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with the weathering that comes from decades underground. He moved with the easy competence of a man who'd spent his whole adult life mining coal. "Rodriguez," I called out. He looked up, and for a moment I saw confusion in his eyes, like he almost remembered something. "Mike? That you? Thought you weren't you just here? I left to get help. You've been down here for 6 hours. He frowned, checking a pocket watch that hadn't been there before. 6 hours? Feels like I've been working this shift for years. Got so much experience now. Know every tunnel, every weak spot, every place that needs shoring up." My father appeared beside him. "Rodriguez is turning into a fine miner. Natural talent for safety work. Could use more men like him." "He's not a miner," I said. "He's 26 years old with a college degree. You're killing him." "Ain't killing nobody," my father said calmly. "Teaching him useful work. Important work. This mountain's still unstable, Michael. Still got weak spots that could bring her down. Still got people who need protecting." I looked around the chamber, really seeing it for the first time. These men weren't just working aimlessly. They had plans spread on makeshift tables, detailed drawings of tunnel systems and support structures. They'd been planning this safety project for 30 years. "You're trying to finish the job that killed you," I said. Bill Henderson nodded. "Smart boy. Always knew you had the mining sense. Yeah, we're fixing what went wrong. That explosion in 52 happened because we didn't get the supports set right. Been working to correct that ever since." "But you died in that explosion," I said. "All of you. The supports failed, the mountain came down, and you were crushed." "Not yet we ain't," Joe Martinez said. "Still got time to get it right. Still got work to do." Tommy Wright pointed to a section of tunnel where several men were installing massive wooden beams. "Get this last section shored up proper, and the weak spots are covered. Said, mountain stays stable. Nobody else gets hurt." "Rodriguez," I said, "you have to remember who you are. You're not a miner. You work for the Park Service. You have a life outside these tunnels." He stared at me with eyes that held decades of underground experience. "Don't know what you're talking about, Mike. Been mining since I was 18. Know these tunnels better than my own home." That's when I understood the trap. These men weren't evil. They weren't trying to hurt anybody. They were doing exactly what they'd always done. Important, dangerous work to keep people safe. But they were dead. And their work was never going to end because they didn't understand that they were dead. "Dad," I said, looking at my father, "you died trying to set a support beam in Tunnel C. The methane ignited, there was an explosion, and the mountain came down. I was 12 years old when they told me." My father's expression didn't change. Haven't died yet, son. Still working. Still got time to get it right. It's been 27 years. Feels like yesterday we started this shift. Time's different when you're doing important work. I walked over to Rodriguez and grabbed him by the shoulders. He felt solid, real, but when I looked closely, I could see through him slightly, like he was becoming something else. Rodriguez, what's your name? Everyone calls me Rodriguez, he said uncertainly. Your first name? What's your first name? He frowned, trying to remember. It's been Rodriguez so long. It's David, I said. David Rodriguez. You grew up in California. You studied history because you wanted to preserve stories about working people. You've only been in West Virginia for 6 months. For a moment, clarity flickered in his eyes. David, yes, I remember. I had a different life, before the mines. The other miners stopped working and turned to watch yous. My father stepped closer. Don't confuse the boy, Michael. He's learning important skills. This work matters. This work is finished, I said. It was finished in 1952 when the mountain came down and killed you all. You can't prevent something that already happened. But we can get it right this time, my father said. Set the supports proper. Keep the mountain stable. Keep people safe. I looked at the elaborate safety project they'd been building for 3 decades. The careful support work, the detailed planning, the methodical approach to preventing disaster. And suddenly, I understood. You're not trying to prevent the 1952 explosion, I said. You're trying to prevent future explosions. You think if you get the supports right this time, other miners won't die the way you did. My father nodded. Smart boy. Always knew you understood the work. This mountain's got weak spots all through her. We fix them now, nobody else has to die. But Dad, there are no other miners. These mines have been abandoned for 30 years. Tourism now, not coal mining. He looked at me with infinite patience. There's always miners, son. Always men going underground to do dangerous work. Our job is to make sure they come back up. I realized that these ghosts were trapped not by malice or revenge, but by the most human impulse of all. They wanted to protect people. They wanted their deaths to mean something. David, I said to Rodriguez, you have to choose. You can stay here and work forever on a job that will never end. Or you can remember who you really are and come back to the surface with me. Rodriguez looked around the chamber, confusion clear on his aged face. But the work, it's so important. People could get hurt if we don't finish. People already got hurt, these people. And now they're trying to save you from becoming like them. My father put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Stay, Michael. Do the work with us. Important work. Family work. For a moment, I was tempted. The idea of working alongside my father, learning the skills that had defined our families, for generations, completing something meaningful that would protect people from danger. It pulled at something deep inside me. But I looked at Rodriguez, aging rapidly from supernatural mining experience, and I knew what I had to do. The work is finished, I said firmly. You completed it, all of you. You gave your lives doing safety work that mattered. Your sacrifice saved other miners in other places. But now it's time to rest. Can't rest while there's still work to do, my father said. There's always work to do, I replied. That's not a reason to work forever. That's a reason to trust other people to carry on. I took out my modern mining safety manual and laid it on the work table. Look at this. Look what your work led to. Modern safety standards that prevent the kinds of accidents that killed you. Your work mattered. Your sacrifice saved lives. But it's finished now. The miners gathered around the manual, studying the modern safety procedures with professional interest. Gradually, understanding dawned on their faces. These are good standards, Bill Henderson said. Better than what we had. Based on lessons learned from accidents like yours, I said. Your deaths taught us how to prevent future deaths. The work you started in 1952 is complete. My father looked at me with pride and sadness. You understand the work, Michael. Always knew you would. I understand it, I said, and I'll carry it forward. But you can rest now. One by one, the electric lights began to dim. The miners set down their tools and looked around the chamber like they were seeing it clearly for the first time. Shift's over, my father said quietly. Time to clock out. Rodriguez blinked, and suddenly he looked young again. Confused and tired, but young. Mike, what happened? Where are we? We're going home, I said. The last light went out, and we walked toward the surface in darkness, leaving the dead miners to their rest at last. Rodriguez and I emerged from Mineshaft 7 just as dawn was breaking over the gorge. The tunnel entrance looked ordinary again, just a dark hole in the mountainside with no sign of the supernatural workplace that had existed inside. Rodriguez collapsed the moment we reached fresh air. When the medics finally arrived, they said he was suffering from exhaustion and severe dehydration. But they couldn't explain why his hair had gone completely gray overnight, or why his hands showed calluses from decades of manual labor he'd never done. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When he came back to work, he could barely remember what had happened underground. But sometimes I'd catch him humming old mining songs he'd never heard before or using safety terminology from the 1950s. He requested a transfer to surface duties only, never went underground again. I supervised the permanent sealing of all the abandoned mine entrances in our section. We used modern techniques, concrete and steel reinforcement that would last centuries. As we sealed each entrance, I said a quiet thank you to the men who'd spent 30 years trying to keep the mountains safe. The unusual radio chatter stopped after that. No more voices discussing shift changes or safety procedures from decades past. The equipment readings went back to normal. The coal dust footprints never appeared again. But I developed a problem I'd never had before. Claustrophobia. Severe, crippling fear of enclosed spaces. I can't go underground anymore. Not even into a basement. My mining heritage, the thing I'd been proud of my whole life, became something I could barely think about without panic attacks. I requested reassignment to surface interpretation only. Now I tell tourists about the industrial history of the gorge, but I never mention the miners who died in 1952. Some stories are too dangerous to share. Sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls thick through the gorge, I think I can still hear the sound of distant mining equipment. The rhythm of product, live work. The voices of men who cared so much about keeping people safe that they couldn't rest, even in death. I've learned that other abandoned mining sites throughout West Virginia have similar stories. Reports of impossible activities in sealed tunnels. Sounds of work being done where no work should be possible. Always the same pattern. Dedicated workers trying to complete safety projects that death prevented them from finishing. There's a government task force now, quietly investigating what they call industrial heritage anomalies. They don't advertise their work, but they seal a lot of old mine entrances and factory sites, places where the commitment to important work was so strong that it survived the workers themselves. Rodriguez retired early. The aging effects never completely reversed, and he couldn't handle the psychological strain of what we'd experienced. He moved back to California and opened a small museum dedicated to worker safety throughout American history. He never talks about how he gained his expertise in mining techniques from the 1950s. Sometimes he sends me newspaper clippings about industrial accidents, with notes in the margins about safety procedures that could have prevented them. His handwriting looks like it belongs to a man with 40 years of mining experience. I still work at New River Gorge, but I stay on the surface now. I tell visitors about the brave miners who died doing dangerous work to keep people safe. I don't mention that some of them spent 3 decades continuing that work after death, because I learned something important in those tunnels. Some jobs are too important to abandon, even when they kill you. Some workers care so much about protecting others that they'll sacrifice their own rest to complete one more safety project. The coal dust devils of New River Gorge aren't malicious spirits. They're good men who love the shul. Our work so much that death couldn't make them clock out. They're at rest now, I think. I hope. But late at night, when the fog is thick and the gorge is quiet, I sometimes wonder if there are other mining sites with similar problems. Other places where dedicated workers are still trying to finish just one more safety project. And I wonder what would happen if they succeeded. If all the industrial ghosts throughout America finally completed their eternal shifts and clocked out for good. Would the mountains be safer? Would the factories run more smoothly? Would the bridges and tunnels and mines built by living workers benefit from the supernatural expertise of the dead? I don't know. But I do know that somewhere in these mountains, there are sealed mine entrances that will stay sealed forever. Because the men who died protecting miners in 1952 finally finished their work in 1979. Their shift is over. Their duty is complete. But mine continues. Every day I tell visitors about the industrial heritage of New River Gorge, about the dangerous work that built America and the brave people who did it. I just don't tell them about the ones who are still working. Some stories are too important to share, and some work is too dangerous to disturb. The dead have earned their rest. It's our job now to carry on the work of keeping people safe, just like my father taught me, before he died, trying to shore up a tunnel that would save lives. Some lessons transcend death. Some responsibilities pass from father to son. And some work is so important that it never really ends. It just gets handed down to the next generation of workers who understand what matters. My name is Michael Ashford, and I've been a park ranger at New River Gorge for 18 years. Long enough to know that the most dangerous thing about old mines isn't cave-ins or gas leaks. It's the good men who died doing important work and never learned how to rest. My name is Benjamin Crowfoot, and I've been walking these mountain ridges for 17 years. Folks around here call me Ben, and I'm a park ranger for the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. My job is simple: keep people safe in the wilderness. But after what happened last October, I'm not sure anyone is really safe down in those caves. I was born and raised in these mountains. My daddy worked the mines, just like his daddy before him. But I saw what the darkness underground did to my family. My little brother Tommy died in a cave-in when I was 25. After that, I swore I'd spend my life getting people out of tight spots, not digging deeper into them. That's how I became a cave rescue specialist. I know every tunnel, every drop, every dangerous passage in a 100-mile radius around Seneca Rocks. I've pulled more than 200 people out of trouble over the years. Broken legs, lost hikers, kids who wandered too far from camp. I always bring them home. The call came in at 3:47 on a Tuesday morning in October 1984. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio, waking me from a dead sleep. Ben, we got 3 spelunkers missing in the Seneca system. Last radio contact was yesterday at noon. I rolled out of bed and checked my gear. Headlamp, rope, first aid kit, emergency blankets. Everything looked normal. Outside my cabin, the first frost of the season sparkled on my truck's windshield. The air was sharp and clean, the way it gets right before winter settles in for good. Who are the missing? I asked as I drove toward the trailhead. College kids from Virginia Tech. Names are Sarah Chen, Mike Torres, and David White. They're experienced cavers, Ben. This wasn't some weekend adventure. That made me worry more, not less. Experienced cavers don't just disappear. They know the rules. Stay together, check in every 2 hours, always have backup lies. Acts. If they'd gone silent, something was very wrong. I met my partner Rodriguez at the main entrance to the cave system. He was 26, eager, and still believed he could save everyone. I liked that about him, even if it made me nervous sometimes. What do you think happened? Rodriguez asked as we checked our equipment one more time. I shrugged. Could be anything. Rockfall, equipment failure, got turned around in a passage they didn't know. We'll find them. The entrance to the Seneca Caves looks like a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But once you're inside, it opens up into a maze of tunnels that go down for miles. Some passages are wide enough to drive a truck through. Others are so narrow, you have to take off your pack and push it ahead of you. We'd been down these tunnels hundreds of times. I knew them like the rooms of my own house. But as soon as we dropped below ground level that morning, something felt different. The first thing I noticed was the scratches on the cave walls, fresh ones, long, deep gouges in the limestone that hadn't been there the week before. They looked like claw marks, but bigger than any animal I knew. "Hey, Ben," Rodriguez called from ahead. "Come look at this." He was kneeling beside a small pile of rocks. At first glance, it looked natural, but when I got closer, I could see the rocks had been stacked on purpose. Someone had built a little cairn, like the trail markers hikers use. "That's weird," I said. "This passage doesn't go anywhere important." Rodriguez picked up one of the rocks. Underneath was a small piece of carved wood. It was rough, like someone had whittled it with a pocket knife, but the carving was detailed, a tiny bird with its wings spread wide. "Sarah Chen was studying art," Rodriguez said quietly. "Maybe she dropped this." I took the carving and turned it over in my hands. The wood was dry, but not old. It had been carved recently. But why would a missing caver stop to make folk art in the middle of an emergency? We kept moving deeper. The normal sounds of the cave, dripping water, our footsteps, our breathing, seemed muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over everything. The air was still and warm, which wasn't right. Caves stay the same temperature year-round, usually around 50 degrees. But the deeper we went, the warmer it got. "Is it just me, or is it getting hot in here?" Rodriguez asked. I checked my thermometer, 60 degrees, then 65. At 300 feet down, it read 72 degrees. That was impossible. There was no geothermal activity in this area. I'd studied the geological surveys myself. We found more carvings as we went deeper. Little wooden animals, carved flowers, even a tiny human figure. All of them were fresh, made with metal tools, not the kind of thing you'd expect to find in an unexplored cave system. Then Rodriguez stopped suddenly and grabbed my arm. "Do you smell that?" he whispered. I breathed deeply. Under the usual cave smells of damp rock and bat droppings, there was something else. Something that made my stomach growl, even though I'd eaten breakfast just a few hours before. It smelled like cooking meat. We followed that smell for another hour, winding through passages I'd mapped years ago. But everything looked different now. Familiar rock formations seemed strange, like someone had rearranged them while I wasn't looking. The smell got stronger as we went deeper. It wasn't just cooked meat anymore. I could smell wood smoke. And something else. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen when she was baking bread. "Ben," Rodriguez said, his voice tight. "Look at this." We'd come into a wider chamber, about the size of a living room. In the middle of the floor was a circle of stones with cold ashes inside. Someone had built a fire here, and recently. The ashes were still soft, not packed down by moisture. But that wasn't the strangest part. Around the fire circle, someone had set up furniture, real furniture. There was a rough wooden table, 3 chairs carved from single pieces of wood, and shelves cut right into the cave wall. On the shelves were bowls, cups, even folded cloth that looked like clothing. "This can't be right," I said, walking around the camp. Everything was handmade, but well-crafted. Whoever lived here knew what they were doing. Rodriguez picked up one of the bowls. It was still damp, like it had been washed recently. "Ben, people are living down here. Actually, living down here." I wanted to argue with him, but I couldn't. The evidence was right in front of us. Someone had set up a permanent home 300 feet underground, in a cave system that was supposed to be unexplored. We searched the chamber carefully. In one corner we found backpacks, modern ones with Virginia Tech patches. Our missing cavers had been here. But where were they now? "Sarah! Mike! David!" I called into the darkness beyond the chamber. My voice echoed back, but there was no answer. Rodriguez was examining the shelves when he went very still. "Ben, you need to see this." He was holding a metal plate, the kind they use in the military. Stamped on the bottom were letters, U.S. Army, and a date, 1943. "That's from World War II, I said. "How did it get down here?" Before Rodriguez could answer, we heard something that made both of us freeze. It was singing. Someone was singing in the darkness ahead of us, their voice echoing off the cave walls. The song was in a language I didn't recognize, but the tune was sad and beautiful. It sounded like a lullaby, the kind a mother might sing to help a child fall asleep. "We should go back," Rodriguez whispered. "Get back up." I knew he was right. This was beyond anything we'd trained for. But those 3 college kids were somewhere down there, and every minute we waited was another minute they might not survive. "Just a little further," I said. "We find them. We get out." We crept toward the sound of singing. The passage narrowed, then opened into another chamber. This one was bigger, maybe the size of a small church, and it wasn't empty. There were people down there, at least a dozen of them, sitting in a circle around another fire. They were pale, so pale they almost seemed to glow in the firelight. Their hair was white or very light blonde, and their clothes looked like something from a history book. Rough shirts and pants, all in shades of brown and gray. They were singing together, their voices blending in perfect harmony. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, and the most terrifying. In the middle of their circle sat 3 people in modern clothes: Sarah, Mike, and David, our missing cavers. But they weren't tied up or hurt. They were singing along, their faces peaceful and happy. Rodriguez started to stand up, ready to call out to them. I grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back down behind the rocks where we were hiding, because I'd noticed something about the pale people that made my blood run cold. Their eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's, and when they turned their heads, I could see that their pupils were huge, adapted for seeing in complete darkness. These weren't normal people. These were something else entirely. The singing stopped suddenly. One of the pale people, an older man with a long white beard, stood up and looked directly at our hiding spot. "Come out, friends," he said in perfect English with a slight accent I couldn't place. "We know you're there." Rodriguez looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. We had 2 choices: run or face whatever these people were. I thought about the 3 college kids sitting peacefully by the fire. They didn't look like prisoners. I stood up slowly, my hands visible and empty. Rodriguez did the same. "We're park rangers," I said. "We're looking for the missing cavers." The old man smiled, and his teeth were perfectly white. "You found them. As you can see, they are safe and well cared for." Sarah Chen looked up at us and waved. She was smiling, but there was something wrong with her eyes. They had the same reflective quality as the pale people's eyes. "Hi, Rangers," she called. "You don't need to rescue us. We're fine here. Better than fine, actually." Mike and David nodded agreement. They looked healthy and relaxed, but different somehow, like they'd changed in some fundamental way during their time underground. "We need to take them back to the surface," I said to the old man. "Their families are worried." The old man nodded thoughtfully. "Of course. But first, you must rest. You've had a long journey down here. My people will prepare food. We have much to discuss." Other pale people were moving around us now, not threatening, but clearly making sure we wouldn't leave easily. They moved silently, like ghosts, and their huge dark eyes never left our faces. "We really should be going," Rodriguez said nervously. "Nonsense," the old man said. "It's dangerous to travel these caves when you're tired. Rest first, then we'll talk about what comes next." The old man introduced himself as Wilhelm. He spoke English perfectly, but with an accent that sounded German. He led us deeper into the cave system, through passages I'd never seen before despite 17 years of exploring these mountains. "How long have you been down here?" I asked as we walked. Wilhelm smiled. "Time moves differently underground, Ranger Crowfoot. We measure our lives by the seasons of the deep places, not by the sun you worship above." That wasn't really an answer, but something about Wilhelm's calm voice made it hard to ask follow-up questions. Rodriguez walked beside me, but he seemed distracted, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The passage opened into a cavern so large my headlamp couldn't reach the walls, but it wasn't empty. It was full of buildings. Not buildings, exactly. More like structures carved directly out of the living rock. Homes, workshops, even what looked like a small church, all connected by stone pathways. Oil lamps and torches provided flickering light, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. "Welcome to our village," Wilhelm said proudly. "Home to 53 souls, and growing." People came out to look at us, men, women, even children. All of them had that same pale skin and those huge dark eyes. They wore simple clothes and moved with the quiet grace of people who'd spent their whole lives walking on stone. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, ran up to Rodriguez and tugged on his shirt. She said something in what sounded like German. Rodriguez smiled and answered her in the same language. I stared at him. "Since when do you speak German?" Rodriguez blinked, looking confused. I don't know. I don't remember learning it." Wilhelm nodded approvingly. "The deep places teach us many things, young ranger. They open our minds to knowledge we didn't know we possessed." Sarah, Mike, and David were waiting for us in the center of the village. They looked completely at home here, like they'd been living underground their whole lives. Sarah was wearing one of the rough brown dresses, and her skin already looked paler than I remembered. "Isn't this amazing?" she said when she saw us. "They've built an entire civilization down here. They have farms, workshops, even a school for the children." "How is that possible?" I asked. "What do you eat? Where does your water come from?" Wilhelm gestured around the cavern. "The deep places provide everything we need. Mushrooms that grow without sunlight, fish from the underground rivers, fresh water from springs that never run dry. We've learned to live in harmony with the darkness." He wasn't wrong. I could see gardens growing in the soft earth, tended by pale people who moved between the rows of strange plants I didn't recognize. The air smelled of cooking food and wood smoke, but also something else, something clean and alive. "But why do you stay down here?" Rodriguez asked. "Don't you miss the sun? Fresh air? The world above?" A shadow passed over Wilhelm's face. "The world above is full of pain and war and suffering. Down here we have peace, we have purpose, we have each other." A woman approached carrying wooden bowls filled with something that smelled like stew. She handed one to each of us and smiled without speaking. Her eyes were kind, but when she smiled, I noticed her teeth were very sharp. I looked down at the stew. It smelled wonderful, but something about it made me nervous. "What kind of meat is this?" "Cave fish," Wilhelm said. "Very nutritious, very filling." Rodriguez was already eating, and his face lit up with pleasure. "This is incredible. I've never tasted anything like it." I took a small sip of the broth. It was rich and savory, better than anything I'd ever eaten. But as soon as I swallowed, I felt strange, relaxed in a way that didn't seem natural. "The college kids need to come back with us," I said, trying to focus. "Their families will call the police if we don't bring them back soon." Wilhelm nodded sadly. "Yes, the surface world and its demands. But look at them, Ranger. Look how happy they are here. Look how healthy. Is it not cruel to drag them back to a world of pollution and violence and loneliness?" He had a point. Sarah, Mike, and David did look happy. Happier than most people I knew on the surface. But there was something wrong with the happiness, something artificial about it. "They can visit," I said, "but they need to go home." "Of course," Wilhelm agreed. "But first, you should see more of our village. Understand what we've built here. Then you can make an informed decision about what's best for everyone." Rodriguez stood up suddenly. "I'd like to see more. This place is fascinating." That surprised me. Rodriguez was usually eager to get back to the surface after a rescue. He didn't like being underground for long periods. Wilhelm smiled and clapped Rodriguez on the shoulder. "Excellent. Maria will show you around. She speaks excellent English." A young woman with white blonde hair stepped forward and took Rodriguez's arm. She led him away toward what looked like workshops carved into the cave wall. "What about our radio check-in?" I called after him. "We're supposed to report back every 2 hours." Rodriguez turned and looked at me with those strange, reflective eyes. "The radios don't work down here anyway, Ben. You know that." He was right. The deeper parts of the cave system were dead zones. No radio signals could get through all that rock. Wilhelm gestured for me to follow him toward the church-like structure. "Come, Ranger Crowfoot. Let me show you something that might interest you." Inside the stone church, the walls were covered with carvings. Some looked Christian, crosses and images of Jesus. But others were older, stranger. Symbols I didn't recognize mixed with pictures of underground rivers and cave systems. My people have been guardians of the deep places for many generations, Wilhelm said. We came here during the war seeking refuge from the madness above. We found something better than refuge. We found home. What war? I asked. Wilhelm's eyes grew distant. The Second Great War. When the armies of the world tore each other apart over scraps of land and pride, some of us refused to participate. We came here instead. That would make Wilhelm at least 60 years old, but he looked 40 at most. The pale people seemed ageless, like the darkness had preserved them. There was a prisoner of war camp near here, I said slowly, remembering the history. German prisoners, 1943 to 1946. Wilhelm smiled. You know your local history? Yes, some of us were prisoners. Others were guards who grew tired of guarding. We found each other in the deep places, and we found peace. It was starting to make sense. During World War II, there had been a POW camp about 20 miles of Mansgas from here. According to the records, 23 prisoners had died in a cave-in while working on a construction project. But maybe they hadn't died. Maybe they'd just never come back up. How many people are down here? I asked. 53 souls, Wilhelm repeated. Though we hope to be 55 soon. The way he said it made my skin crawl. What do you mean? Wilhelm turned to face me fully. In the flickering torchlight, his pale face looked almost skull-like. Your partner Rodriguez is already beginning to understand the truth about the surface world. How empty it is, how meaningless. The 3 students have seen it too. And you, Ranger Crowfoot, you've lost someone to the darkness above, haven't you? Someone who died because of the surface world's cruelty? My brother Tommy's face flashed in my mind. He died in a mine collapse when I was 25, crushed under tons of rock while digging coal to heat houses and power cities that didn't care about him. How do you know about that? I whispered. The deep places whisper many secrets to those who listen, Wilhelm said. Down here, your brother would still be alive. Down here, we protect each other from the grinding machinery of the world above. He was right, and that terrified me. Tommy would be alive if he'd never gone down into those mines. But this wasn't the answer. This was just another kind of death. I need to find Rodriguez, I said. We need to leave. Now. Wilhelm sighed sadly. If you insist. But first, let me ask you one question. In 17 years of rescue work, how many people have you truly saved? How many went back to the surface only to die in car crashes, drug overdoses, suicides? How many would have been better off staying lost? I thought about all the rescues I'd made over the years. How many of those people were still alive? How many were happy? The answer was depressing. That's not the point, I said. People have the right to choose. Yes, Wilhelm agreed. They do, and Rodriguez has already made his choice. I found Rodriguez in what looked like a workshop, learning to carve wood from one of the pale people. His movements were fluid and confident, like he'd been doing it for years instead of minutes. Rodriguez, we need to go, I said, right now. He looked up at me with those strange, reflective eyes. Why? What's the hurry, Ben? Because we have a job to do. People are depending on us. Rodriguez set down his carving. It was a small bird, just like the ones we'd found throughout the caves. What people? The surface world doesn't care about us, Ben. We're just cleanup crew for other people's mistakes. That wasn't the Rodriguez I knew. He'd always been idealistic about rescue work, always believed we were making a difference. What did they do to you? I asked. They opened my eyes, Rodriguez said calmly. Look around, Ben. Look at this place. These people have created something beautiful down here, something pure. No crime, no pollution, no war. No one dies alone and forgotten. No one dies at all, right? I said. That's the catch. Rodriguez smiled. Would that be so bad? No more funerals, no more grief, no more watching people you love disappear into the ground. I thought about Tommy again. If he were here, Would I want to leave? But that was exactly the trap they were laying for me. They'd studied me somehow, learned about my deepest pain, and now they were using it against me. Where are Sarah, Mike, and David? I demanded. I want to talk to them alone. They're in the learning chambers, Rodriguez said. Wilhelm is teaching them about the deep places, about how to listen to the caves and understand what they're saying. I didn't like the sound of that. Show me. Rodriguez led me through more carved passages to a chamber where the 3 college students sat in a circle around Wilhelm. Their eyes were closed and they were breathing in perfect unison. Wilhelm was speaking in German, his voice low and hypno. What's he doing to them? I asked. Teaching them to hear the voice of the deep places, Rodriguez said. The caves are alive, Ben. They have consciousness, awareness. Wilhelm is showing them how to commune with that intelligence. Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at me. When she spoke, her voice was different, deeper, with a slight echo. The surface world is dying, Ranger Crowfoot, she said. The air is poison, the water is contaminated, the soil is depleted. Down here, everything is clean and eternal. That's not Sarah talking, I said to Rodriguez. That's Wilhelm, or this place, or something else. Rodriguez shook his head. That's Sarah seeing clearly for the first time in her life. Mike and David opened their eyes too. They all had that same reflective quality now, like their pupils had been replaced with mirrors. We're not going back, Mike said. There's nothing for us up there. What about your families? I asked. Your friends? Your futures? David laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was too old, too knowing. What futures? Working jobs we hate to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like? Down here we have purpose. We're part of something greater than ourselves. Wilhelm stood up and walked over to me. You see, Ranger Crowfoot? They choose to stay, just as your partner chooses to stay, just as you will choose to stay once you understand what we're offering. And what's that? Community, Wilhelm said. Safety. An end to loneliness and fear and the endless grinding struggle of modern life. We offer you peace, Benjamin Crowfoot. We offer you the chance to never lose anyone again. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. No more middle-of-the-night rescue calls. No more pulling bodies out of caves and rivers and wrecked cars. No more watching families destroyed by loss. But it wasn't real peace. It was just another kin of prison. What happens if I say no? I asked. Wilhelm's smile faded. No one says no, Benjamin. Not once they truly understand what we're offering. But if you insist on returning to the surface world, you're free to go. We're not monsters. We don't force anyone to stay against their will. And Rodriguez? Sarah, Mike, and David? They've made their choice, Wilhelm said. They're home now. I looked around the chamber. More of the pale people had appeared, maybe 20 of them, standing silently around the walls. They weren't threatening exactly, but they weren't going to let me leave with the others either. I want to talk to Rodriguez alone, I said. Wilhelm nodded. Of course. But first, let me show you one more thing, something I think you'll find interesting. He led me to another chamber, this one smaller and warmer than the others. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, all showing the same cave system, but from different time periods. Some were old black and white photos that looked like they were from the 1940s. Others were more recent color pictures. These are the people who've joined us over the years, Wilhelm said. Prisoners of war who chose freedom over repatriation. Miners who grew tired of digging for other men's profit. Hikers who got lost and found something better than the trail they were following. I studied the photographs. In each one, groups of pale people stood together, smiling. And in many of them, I could see newer arrivals. People who still looked normal, still had color in their skin and natural-sized pupils. How long does the change take? I asked. That depends on the person, Wilhelm said. Some adapt to the deep places quickly. Others take years. But everyone changes eventually. The caves change us all. And if someone wanted to leave after they'd changed, Wilhelm's face grew sad. The surface world becomes Difficult for those who've lived in the deep places too long. The light hurts. The noise is overwhelming. The chaos and cruelty become unbearable. I understood. It wasn't that they couldn't leave. It was that after a while they couldn't survive up there anymore. What about families? People looking for the missing? Cave-ins, Wilhelm said simply. Tragic accidents. Bodies never recovered. It's more merciful than the truth. I thought about the official report I'd have to file. 3 college students lost in a cave-in. Equipment failures. Unstable rock formations. No one would question it. I want to leave, I said, and I want to take Rodriguez with me. Wilhelm sighed. Ask him yourself, but understand, if he chooses to stay, you must respect that choice, just as we respect yours. Rodriguez was waiting for me in the main chamber of the village, but he looked different now, paler, with those same large, dark eyes as the other cave dwellers. The change was happening faster than I'd expected. You're really going back up there? He asked. We both are, I said. This place isn't real, Rodriguez. It's just another kind of death. Rodriguez shook his head. You're wrong, Ben. This is life, real life. Everything up there is just noise and suffering and waste. What about your family, your girlfriend Linda, the kids you wanted to have someday? Pain flashed across Rodriguez's face, but only for a moment. Linda deserves better than a park ranger who's never home. And what kind of world would I be bringing children into? War, pollution, crime, disease. Is that really better than this? I grabbed his shoulders. Listen to me. This place is changing you. It's making you think things that aren't true. The surface world has problems, but it's also got beauty and love and hope. You're just scared right now, confused. Come back with me and we'll figure it out. For a moment, I thought I saw the real Rodriguez in his eyes. The young man who'd wanted to save everyone, who'd believed in making the world better through service. But then Wilhelm appeared beside us, and the moment was gone. Have you made your decision, Ranger Crowfoot? Wilhelm asked. Yes, I said. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Rodriguez with me. Wilhelm turned to Rodriguez. Is that what you want? To return to the surface world? Rodriguez looked at me, then at the pale people gathered around us, then at Sarah, Mike, and David sitting peacefully by the fire. No, he said quietly. I want to stay here. This is where I belong now. My heart sank. I'd lost him. Whatever these people had done, however they'd changed him, it was too late. Then you're free to go, Ranger Crowfoot, Wilhelm said. We'll provide you with supplies for the journey back to the surface, and we'll arrange for the appropriate evidence to support your report. I understood what he meant. They'd cause a cave-in to explain the disappearances. 4 missing people, all presumed dead. Clean and simple. One last chance, Rodriguez, I said. Come with me. He shook his head. I'm home, Ben. For the first time in my life, I'm really home. 2 of the pale people, Maria and another woman I didn't recognize, led me back toward the entrance. They moved silently through passages that seemed different than the ones we'd used to come down, more direct, more efficient. As we climbed higher, I could feel the temperature dropping back to normal cave levels. The spell of the deep places was wearing off, and I could think clearly again. These people weren't evil, exactly. They were just afraid. They'd been running from the world for so long that they'd forgotten how to live in it. And they'd built this underground paradise to hide from pain and loss and uncertainty. But that wasn't living. That was just existing. The pale women left me at a passage I recognized about 100 feet from the main entrance. As I made my way toward daylight, I heard a rumbling behind me. Rocks shifting, passages collapsing. Wilhelm was keeping his word about creating evidence. I emerged into bright October sunlight. After hours in the caves, it felt like needles stabbing my eyes, but I'd never be, and so happy to see the sun. The official report was easy to write. Structural collapse in an unstable cave system. 4 people missing, presumed dead. Recommend permanent closure of the affected passages. Within a week, the Forest Service had sealed the main entrance with concrete and posted warning signs. The Seneca cave system was officially too dangerous for public access. I requested a transfer to a desert posting in Arizona. No caves, no underground rivers, no deep places that whispered lies in the darkness. Just sand and sun and wide-open spaces where nothing could hide. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about Rodriguez and the 3 college students. In my dreams, they're still down there, living in that underground village, getting paler and stranger with each passing year. Sometimes Wilhelm is there too, smiling his gentle smile and speaking in that soft German accent about the peace of the deep places. And sometimes, God help me, I dream that I stayed too, that I'm sitting by their fire, eating their food, listening to their songs, and feeling that terrible, perfect peace that comes from giving up on the world above. I wake up from those dreams in a cold sweat, grateful for the harsh Arizona sun streaming through my windows, because I know the truth about the hollow folk of Seneca Rocks. They're still down there, still singing their songs, still teaching new arrivals about the deep places, still growing their pale community one lost soul at a time. And sometimes, when the moon is dark and the desert wind is howling, I can almost hear them calling my name. My name is David Timberline, and I've been protecting the forests of West Virginia for 20 years now. People think being a park ranger is all about cute bears and hiking trails, but they're wrong. My job is to stop people from cutting down trees that have been growing since before America was even a country. The Cranberry Wilderness is special. It's one of the last places where you can find trees that are 400 years old. These giant hemlocks stretch up so high you can barely see their tops. When the morning fog rolls in, they look like ghosts themselves, all white and mysterious. I wasn't always on the trees' side, though. Before I became a ranger, I was a logger for 10 years. I cut down plenty of old trees back then. Maybe that's why I work so hard to protect them now. I know what it's like to hear a 300-year-old tree crash to the ground. The sound haunts you. It was April of 1988 when everything changed. I was doing my morning patrol with my partner Williams. He was young, maybe 25, and still excited about everything. He loved learning about the old ways of doing things, how people used to live before machines took over. "Look at this, Dave," Williams called out. He was standing next to a massive hemlock that had to be 400 years old, or rather, where it used to stand. Now it was lying on the ground, cut clean through. I walked over and knelt down to look at the stump. My blood went cold. The cut marks weren't from a chainsaw. They were from an old crosscut saw, the kind loggers used 100 years ago. You could see the marks where 2 men had worked the saw back and forth. "Who would use an old saw like this?" Williams asked. I stood up and looked around. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. Just this giant tree lying there like it had been cut by ghosts. "Maybe someone's doing a historical demonstration," said. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. You need permits for that kind of thing. And why would they cut down a protected tree? Williams was excited. "This is incredible. Look how clean the cut is. These old loggers really knew what they were doing." I wasn't excited. I was worried. Someone had cut down a tree that was older than our entire country, and they'd done it in the middle of the night without anyone seeing or hearing them. We walked around the area looking for more clues. That's when we found the wood chips. Fresh ones, still smelling like pine sap. But here's the weird thing. They were scattered in a perfect circle around where the tree had stood, like someone had been cutting for hours. "Dave, smell that?" William said. I did smell it. Pine sap, yes, but also something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's old tool shed. Oil and rust, and old sweat. My radio crackled. "Timberline, you copy?" "I'm here. We've got another one. Big hemlock down near Cranberry Creek. Same type of cut." Williams and I looked at each other. 2 trees in one night, both cut with old tools. This wasn't some history buff. This was something else. We hiked the 2 miles to Cranberry Creek. Sure enough, Another giant tree was down. This one was even older than the first, maybe 500 years. The stump showed the same cross-cut saw marks, but this time there was something else. Carved into a nearby tree were initials. BJI, foreman. Below that, in rough letters, quota, 50 board feet per day. 50 board feet, Williams said. That's not much for a whole crew. I knew it wasn't much. Back in the 1890s, a good logging crew could cut 10 times that. But something about those initials bothered me. BJI. Why did that seem familiar? As we walked back to our truck, I kept looking over my shoulder. The forest felt different somehow. Too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. Williams, I said, I want you to research the logging history of this area. Find out who worked here in the old days. You think this is connected to something historical? I didn't know what I thought, but something was wrong in the cranberry wilderness, and it had to do with the old logging days. I could feel it in my bones. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those clean cuts and the smell of old sweat, and those initials. BJI, I'd seen them somewhere before. Finally, I got up and went to my bookshelf. I pulled out my old logging history books and started reading. It took me an hour, but I found it. Big Jack Iron Axe, logging crew foreman, 1894. Killed along with 31 men in avalanche caused by unstable slope after clear-cutting operation. My hands were shaking as I read the rest. The avalanche had happened right here in the Cranberry area. 31 loggers had died trying to meet their quota so they could pay their families' winter debts. I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. Outside, the wind was starting to pick up, and I could hear something that made my blood freeze. The sound of a cross-cut saw. The next morning, I called Williams early. Meet me at the office. We need to talk. When he showed up, he was more excited than ever. Dave, I've been researching all night. Did you know they had a whole logging camp here in 1894? I know about Big Jack Iron Axe, I said. Williams' eyes went wide. You found him too? Isn't it amazing? He was famous for being able to cut more timber than any other foreman in West Virginia. Williams, he's dead. He died in an avalanche along with his whole crew. I know that, Williams said, looking confused. But someone's using his techniques. Maybe it's his descendants or something. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But deep down, I knew it was something else. We drove back to the wilderness area in my Jeep. I'd brought extra equipment, flashlights, flares, even a camera. If someone was illegally logging at night, I was going to catch them. We parked at the end of the old logging road and hiked in. It was still morning, but the fog was so thick you could barely see 10 feet ahead. Listen, Williams whispered. I stopped walking. There it was again, the sound of men working, axes hitting wood, the back and forth rhythm of a cross-cut saw, voices calling out in the distance. This way, I said, following the sounds. We crept through the fog for maybe a quarter mile. The sounds got louder. I could hear men talking, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the fog lifted for just a moment, and I saw something that made me question my sanity. There was a logging camp in a clearing ahead of us. Tents, equipment, even a cook fire. But everything looked old, really old. The tents were canvas, patched and dirty. The tools were all hand tools. Cross-cut saws, double-bit axes, logging hooks. And the men using them looked like they'd stepped out of an old photograph. Do you see that? I whispered to Williams. But Williams was staring with his mouth open. It's incredible! They're using all the old techniques. I blinked hard and looked again. The fog had rolled back in and I couldn't see anything, but I could still hear them working. We need to get closer, Williams said. Every instinct I had told me to turn around and leave. But Williams was already moving toward the sounds, and I couldn't let him go alone. We crept closer. Through breaks in the fog, I caught glimpses of men in old work clothes. They had suspenders, wool shirts, and cloth caps. One man was huge, probably 6.5 feet tall with arms like tree trunks. That has to be Big Jack, Williams whispered, way too loud. The big man's head snapped up. He looked right at us, even though we were hidden behind trees. "Who goes there?" he called out in a voice like thunder. "You boys looking for work?" Williams stepped out from behind our tree. "Yes, sir. I'd love to learn." "Williams, no!" I hissed. But he was already walking into the clearing. I had no choice but to follow him. Up close, the loggers looked even stranger. Their faces were pale, almost gray. Their eyes were deep and dark, and when they moved, they didn't quite seem to touch the ground. "I'm Big Jack Iron Axe," the huge man said. "Been running logging crews in these mountains for, well, a long time now. I'm Williams, and this is Dave. We're park rangers." Big Jack looked at me with those dark eyes. "You got the look of a man who's cut timber before." I nodded slowly. "Used to be a logger." "Good. We can use experienced men. Got a quota to meet." "What quota?" I asked. Big Jack pointed to a piece of paper nailed to a tree. It looked like a contract, yellowed with age. "Company contract. We don't complete our cutting, our families don't get paid for winter supplies." Williams was examining their tools. "These are amazing. Can you show me how to use the crosscut saw?" "Easy enough," said one of the other loggers. He was thin and had a scar across his forehead. "Just takes two men working together. Rhythm's everything." I watched in horror as Williams picked up one end of a long saw. The scarred man took the other end and they started cutting into a massive hemlock. The saw moved through the wood like it was butter. Williams was laughing with delight. "This is so much better than a chainsaw." But something was wrong. The tree they were cutting was over 300 years old. It was exactly the kind of tree I'd taken an oath to protect. "You can't cut that tree," I said. "It's protected." Big Jack looked confused. "Protected? Son, this is logging territory. Company's got rights to every tree in these mountains." "What company?" I asked. "Mountaineer Timber Company," Big Jack said. "Course that was—" He paused, looking confused. "That was recently." The scarred logger stopped sawing. "Jack, what year is it?" Big Jack's face went blank. It's 1894. Gotta be. We just started this job." Williams had stopped sawing too. He was looking around at all the loggers. In the morning light, I could see right through some of them. "Dave," Williams whispered, "I can see the trees through that man's chest." That's when I knew for sure. These weren't just any loggers using old tools. These were the loggers, the ones who died in the avalanche 94 years ago, and they were still trying to complete their contract. I grabbed Williams by the arm. "We're leaving. Now." But Williams pulled away. "No, Dave. This is the discovery of a lifetime. Do you know what we're looking at?" "Yes, I know exactly what we're looking at," I said. "Dead men." Big Jack laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Dead? Son, we got work to do. These trees don't cut themselves." "You died in an avalanche," I said. "All of you. In 1894. The loggers all stopped what they were doing. They looked at each other with confused expressions. "That's not right," said the scarred man. "We just started this job yesterday." "Look around you," I said. "Really look. What do you see?" Big Jack looked at his hands. You could see the trees behind them. He looked at his men, all of them pale and transparent in the morning light. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "The avalanche happened because of the clear cutting," I explained. "You cut too many trees on the slope. The snow had nothing to hold it back." "But the quota," another logger said. "We got families depending on us." "Your families have been dead for almost 100 years, I said. Williams was still staring at the loggers with wonder. "This is incredible, Dave. They're actually here. They're still working." "They're destroying the forest," I said. "Every night they cut down more protected trees." Big Jack's face darkened. "Trees need cutting. That's what trees are for." "Not anymore," I said. "This is a wilderness area now. These trees are protected by law." "Whose law?" Big Jack demanded. "The United States government." The loggers all laughed at that. "Government don't care about trees," the scarred man said. "Government wants timber for houses and railroads." Realized they were still thinking like it was 1894. They didn't know about environmental protection or conservation. Things have changed, I said. People understand now that cutting all the trees causes problems. What kind of problems? Big Jack asked. The kind that killed you, I said. Avalanches, floods, soil erosion. When you cut all the trees, the whole mountain becomes unstable. Big Jack looked uncertain for the first time. That can't be right. Trees are just trees. William stepped forward. Actually, Dave's right about the environmental science. Trees hold the soil together with their roots. They prevent erosion and landslides. You shut your mouth, boy, Big Jack growled. We know logging. Been doing it our whole lives. But you're not alive, I shouted. You're dead. You died because of your logging. That made Big Jack angry. Really angry. He picked up his axe, and even though you could see through him, the axe looked solid enough. Nobody calls Big Jack Iron Axe a liar, he said. The other loggers picked up their tools too. Suddenly, Williams and I were surrounded by angry dead men with sharp objects. We should go, I whispered to Williams. But Williams was fascinated. Wait, Big Jack, what if we could show you what happened? What if we could prove Dave is telling the truth? Williams, don't. There's a way to check, Williams said. We could go to where the avalanche happened. Look for evidence. Big Jack considered this. If you're lying to us, you'll regret it. I'm not lying, Williams said, but I want to learn your techniques first. Will you teach me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Williams wanted to learn logging from dead men. Williams, we need to leave, I said. Just for a little while, Dave. Think about what we could learn. Big Jack smiled, showing teeth that were gray and cracked. The boy's got sense. We'll teach him pros. Oper logging. Then we'll settle this question about avalanches. The next few hours were like a nightmare. I watched Williams learn to use tools that hadn't been made in a century. The ghost loggers taught him songs they used to sing while working. They showed him how to fell trees with perfect accuracy. And Williams loved every minute of it. This is so much more skillful than modern logging, he said as he helped cut down a 200-year-old oak. You really have to understand the tree. Course you do, said the scarred logger. Trees got a personality. Got to respect that. The terrible thing was, they were right. These men knew more about trees than any modern logger. They could tell by looking at a tree exactly how it would fall. They never wasted a cut. But every tree they cut down was irreplaceable. Some had been growing since before Columbus came to America. By afternoon, they'd cut down 8 giant trees. 8 trees that had taken centuries to grow, gone in a few hours. That's enough for today, Big Jack announced. We'll pick up tomorrow night. Tomorrow night? I said. Why not during the day? The loggers looked at each other uncomfortably. Don't like working in full sunlight, Big Jack said finally. Hurts our eyes. I realized that was because they were dead. Daylight made them fade away. We'll meet you here tomorrow at midnight, Big Jack told Williams. Bring your friend. We'll show him that avalanche site he's so worried about. As the sun got higher, the loggers became harder and harder to see. By noon, they were completely invisible. Only their tools remained, lying on the ground like they'd been abandoned. Williams picked up one of the crosscut saws. Look at this craftsmanship, Dave. They don't make tools like this anymore. Williams, those men are dead. I know that. But they're still here. They're still working. Don't you find that, amazing? I found it terrifying. But Williams was already making plans to come back that night. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. This could be the most important discovery in American history, he said. Ghost loggers still completing their work contract. They're destroying the forest. They're preserving traditional skills, Williams argued. Someone needs to document this before they're gone forever. That night, against my better judgment, I went back with Williams. I couldn't let him face the ghost loggers alone. They were waiting for us in their camp, looking more solid in the darkness. Ready for that avalanche site? Big Jack asked. Big Jack led us up the mountain to a place I'd never seen before. It was a steep slope covered with young trees, maybe 50 or 60 years old. This is where we were working the day of the accident, Big Jack said. Or the day we think it happened. Memory gets fuzzy. I looked around. The slope was steep, but it was covered with trees now. In 1894, it would have been bare rock and mud. You clear-cut this whole slope, I said. Course we did. That's what clear-cutting means, said the scarred logger. Take every tree. Williams was examining the ground. Dave, look at this. He'd found something buried in the leaves. It was a piece of wood with metal attached, part of an old logging tool. There's more over here, I said. I'd found pieces of a tent, some rusty metal, and what looked like part of a boot. The avalanche buried your camp, I said to Big Jack, with all of you in it. Big Jack looked confused. But we're here. We're working. Your bodies are here, Williams said softly, buried under tons of rock and snow. We spent the next hour finding more evidence, pieces of equipment, personal belongings, even some bones. It was clear that a massive avalanche had swept down the mountain and buried everything. This is the tree line from 1894, I said, pointing to where the old growth ended and younger trees began. You can see exactly where the clear-cutting stopped. The ghost log. Ears were quiet now, looking at the evidence. When you cut all the trees, I explained, their roots weren't there to hold the soil together. The first big snow of winter started sliding down the bare slope. It picked up rocks, dirt, everything. By the time it reached your camp, it was like a moving mountain. Our families, Big Jack said quietly. Did they get the money? Williams and I looked at each other. Big Jack, Williams said gently. The company probably went out of business after losing a whole crew. Your families never got paid. That was the moment everything changed. Big Jack's face twisted with rage and grief. You mean we died for nothing? He roared. Our families suffered through winter with no money? I'm afraid so, I said. Big Jack picked up his axe. Then we gotta finish the job. We gotta complete the contract. Big Jack, no, Williams said. The contract doesn't matter anymore. Your families are gone. Everyone you knew is gone. But Big Jack wasn't listening. Boys, he shouted to his crew, we got trees to cut. We got quotas to meet. The ghost loggers picked up their tools and started marching back down the mountain. They were going to cut down more trees, and nothing we said was going to stop them. We have to do something, Williams said. Like what? How do you stop dead men? Williams thought for a moment. What if we destroyed their tools? We tried. We grabbed their cross-cut saws and axes and threw them in the creek. But the next morning the tools were back in the ghost camp, dry and ready for use. For the next week the ghost loggers worked every night. They cut down tree after tree, giant oaks, ancient hemlocks, maples that had been growing since the Revolutionary War. Williams became obsessed with them. He'd sneak out to their camp every night to watch them work. Sometimes he'd help them cut trees. You're becoming one of them, I warned him. Don't be ridiculous, Williams said. But his skin was getting paler, his eyes were getting darker, and he'd started talking about meeting quotas. I knew I was running out of time. The ghost loggers were destroying the forest, and they were stealing William's soul in the process. That's when I had an idea. A dangerous idea, but it might be the only way to stop them. On the next full moon, I went to their camp alone. Big Jack was surprised to see me without Williams. Where's the boy? He asked. Sick, I said. But I want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? I'll help you finish your contract, I said. But first, you have to listen to something. I pulled out a tape recorder I'd borrowed from the Park Service. This is a recording from 1952. It's an interview with the last survivor of your avalanche. That's impossible, Big Jack said. Nobody survived. One person did. A young boy who was visiting the camp with his father. He was outside when the avalanche hit. I pressed play. An old man's voice came out of the speaker. I was only 8 years old when I saw it happen. My pa worked for Big Jack Iron Axe's crew. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Pa brought me along that day. I was playing by the creek when I heard this rumbling sound. I looked up the mountain, and there was this wall of snow and rocks coming down, higher than the trees. It hit the camp so fast nobody had time to run. I found my pa 3 days later when the rescue team dug him out. He was still holding his axe. The ghost loggers were all listening now, their faces pale with memory. The old man's voice continued. The worst part was what happened to the families. The company said it wasn't their fault that the men had been careless. They didn't pay any death benefits. Most of the widows lost their homes. Some of the children starved that winter. Big Jack dropped his axe. No, that can't be true. It is true, I said. And you know what else is true? Every tree you cut down now makes it more likely that another avalanche will happen. There are people dying in the valley now, families with children. We're just trying to do our jobs, the scarred logger said. Your job killed you, I said. And if you keep doing it, you'll kill other people too. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind in the trees that were left. Finally, Big Jack looked at me with those dark, hollow eyes. What do you want us to do? Stop cutting, I said. Just stop. Your contract is from a company that doesn't exist anymore. For families who died a century ago, you're working for nothing. Big Jack sat down heavily on a tree stump. He looked older than before, more tired. But if we stop working, what happens to us? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe you rest. Maybe you go wherever dead people are supposed to go. The scarred logger spoke up. I'm tired, Jack. Been tired for a long time. Me too, said another ghost. This work don't feel right anymore. Big Jack looked around at his crew. Then he looked at all the giant trees they'd cut down over the past weeks. We made a mess, didn't we? He said. Yeah, I said. You did, but you can stop making it worse. Williams chose that moment to stumble into the camp. He looked terrible, pale as a ghost himself with dark circles under his eyes. Williams, I said, what are you doing here? Came to work, he mumbled. Got to meet the quota. Big Jack looked at Williams with something like shame in his eyes. Boy's been helping us too much, he said. We've been taking something from him. His life, I said. You're killing him. Williams picked up a crosscut saw. Come on, let's get to work. Trees don't cut themselves. But Big Jack gently took the saw away from him. No, son. We're done working. Done. Williams looked confused. But the contract. There ain't no contract, Big Jack said sadly. There ain't been no contract for 100 years. I could see, understanding dawning in Williams' eyes. Color started coming back to his face. Big Jack stood up and faced his crew. Boys, we've been dead for near a century. Our families are gone. Our work is gone. Maybe it's time we were gone too. What about all these trees we cut? The scarred logger asked. Can't undo what's done, Big Jack said, but we can stop doing more harm. One by one, the ghost loggers put down their tools. As they did, they started to fade away. Not all at once, but slowly, like morning fog burning off in sunlight. Thank you, Big Jack said to me, for telling us the truth. I'm sorry about your families, I said. So are we, son. So are we. Big Jack was the last to go. As he faded away, he said, Take care of these trees. They're older and wiser than any of us. Then he was gone, and Williams and I were alone in the forest. Williams was shaking. Dave, what happened to me? I feel like I've been asleep for weeks. You were under their influence, I said. But you're okay now. We walked back through the forest in silence. Everywhere we looked, we could see the damage the ghost loggers had done. Dozens of ancient trees lay on the ground like fallen giants. How do we explain this? Williams asked. We don't, I said. We just make sure it doesn't happen again. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Over the next few months, I heard reports from other rangers in other forests. Trees cut down with old tools. Logging camps that appeared and disappeared. The sound of crosscut saws in the night. I think when we laid Big Jack's crew to rest, we woke up other crews. Other dead loggers who died in other accidents, still trying to complete their contracts. Williams transferred to a desk job in the city. He said he never wanted to see another tree again. I understood why. Me, I kept working in the cranberry wilderness. Someone had to protect what was left. Someone had to make sure the living trees stayed that way. But sometimes, on foggy mornings, I still hear the sound of saws in the distance. And I know that somewhere out there, dead men are still trying to finish jobs that were never worth starting. The forest remembers everything. The trees that grew, the trees that fell, and the men who died cutting them down. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can hear them all, the living and the dead, trying to tell their stories before it's too late. Some debts, I learned, are paid with more than money. Sometimes they're paid with your soul. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, they're never paid at all. My name is Jackson Nightwind, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 21 years. That's long enough to know every sound the wilderness makes. The way wind howls through boulder fields, how snow cracks on frozen branches, the difference between a lost hiker's call and an elk's bugle. At least I thought I knew. It was January 15th, 1962, when everything I believed about these mountains changed forever. The thermometer read 15 below zero, and the Weather Service was screaming about a blizzard moving in from the west. Bad weather for anyone to be out, but especially bad for the Morrison family who'd been missing for 2 days. 4 people don't just vanish in dolly sods, even in winter. This isn't your typical state park with marked trails and visitor centers. We're talking about a 4,000-foot high plateau that stretches for miles, heath barrens, cranberry bogs, and boulder fields that can break an ankle in broad daylight. In blizzard conditions, it becomes a death trap. I was suiting up for the search when my radio crackled. "Nightwind, we got voices coming from Sector 7, Stevens reported. He was my partner, barely 30 years old, and still trusted his GPS more than his gut. "Sounds like kids calling for help." I strapped on my snowshoes and checked my gear one more time. Avalanche beacon, survival shelter, emergency rations, first aid kit, everything a man needs to survive a night on the plateau if things go wrong. And in weather like this, things always go wrong. "How many searchers you got in Sector 7? I asked. "None. That's the problem. We swept that area yesterday. Nothing but rocks and ice." The wind picked up, sending snow devils spinning across the parking area. Somewhere out there, the Morrison family was fighting for their lives. Tom Morrison, his wife Sarah, and their twin boys, 8 years old. They'd been cross-co, skiing when the first storm hit 2 days ago. Their car was still in the parking lot, covered in snow, but they'd never made it back. I've led over 300 search and rescue operations in my time. Found lost hikers, hunters who wandered off trail, even a few folks who thought they could handle the wilderness better than it could handle them. Most of the time, we bring them home safe. Sometimes we bring them home in body bags, but we always bring them home. This time felt different. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell stories about voices in the mountains, spirits that could sound like anyone they wanted, calling travelers off safe paths and into danger. But I'd spent 4 years in the Army learning to track, and 17 more years in these mountains proving that every mystery has a rational explanation. Voice mimics were just echoes and overactive imaginations. At least, that's what I told myself as I headed up the trail toward Sector 7. The snow was coming down harder now, thick flakes that stuck to everything and made the world look like the inside of a shaken snow globe. My boots crunched through the crust, and each step sent little avalanches rolling down the hillside. Somewhere ahead, children were calling for help from a place where no children should be. I keyed my radio. "Stevens, I'm approaching Sector 7. You still hearing those voices?" Static answered me. Then, faint but clear through the storm, "Help us! Someone please help us!" The voices were coming from straight ahead, where the plateau opened into a bowl-shaped depression filled with huge granite boulders. I'd searched that exact spot yesterday afternoon. Nothing there but rock and ice and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. But kids were calling from somewhere in those rocks, and that meant the Morrison twins were still alive. I picked up my pace, following the sound, through the storm. The voices led me deeper into the boulder field than I'd ever been. These weren't the small rocks you see on hiking trails. These were chunks of granite the size of school buses thrown around like toys by glaciers 10,000 years ago. They created a maze of narrow passages and dead ends where a man could get lost 50 feet from safety. "We're down here. Please help us." The voice was high and scared, definitely a child. But it was coming from underneath me, like the kids were trapped in some kind of cave system. I know every cave in Dolly Sods. There aren't any. "Hello," I called back. "This is Park Ranger Nightwind. Where are you?" "Down here. We can't get out." I followed the voice to a pile of boulders that formed a small clearing. The snow here was undisturbed, no footprints, no sign anyone had been here recently. But the voices were definitely coming from below, maybe 10 or 15 feet down. I got on my radio. "Stevens, I've got contact with possible survivors in the boulder field. Gonna need ropes and maybe some excavation equipment. Sounds like they're trapped under the rocks." "Copy that. But Nightwind, we've got a problem. I'm hearing voices too, and they're not coming from Sector 7. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm hearing Tom Morrison calling for help from Sector 12. Clear as day, saying he's hurt and needs medical attention." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Sector 12 was 2 miles away on the complete opposite side of the plateau. Either the family had split up, which made no sense in survival terms, or something else was going on. "Kids, I need you to keep talking so I can find exactly where you are," I called down into the rocks. "We're scared. It's dark and cold." The voice was crystal clear, but I couldn't see any gaps between the boulders big enough for children to fall through. I started moving rocks anyway, looking for any opening that might lead to a cave or crevice. That's when I heard the second voice. "Jackson? Jackson, is that you?" I froze. The voice was mine, my exact voice, down to the slight rasp I get when I've been shouting orders all day. But I hadn't said anything. I was standing alone in a snowstorm, listening to my own voice call my own name from somewhere in the rocks below. "Jackson, I found them! They're over here!" My voice again, excited now like I'd just made the discovery of a lifetime. But my mouth was closed, and my throat wasn't making any sound. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Stevens, you getting this?" "Getting what?" "The radio chatter. Someone's using my voice." Long pause. Then, "Nightwind, you're not on the radio. Haven't heard from you in 10 minutes. But I could hear my own voice clear as day, calling from different directions now. "Found the cave entrance," from the north. "Got medical supplies," from the south. "Family's alive, need immediate evac," from somewhere behind me. I spun around trying to locate the source, but the voices seemed to bounce off the rocks from every direction at once. And they weren't just copying my words. They were having full conversations, discussing search patterns and medical conditions and evacuation procedures I'd never heard before. The wind died down for a moment, and in the sudden silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Whistling. Not the random noise wind makes through rocks, but actual music, a simple melody that reminded me of something my grandmother used to hum. 5 notes, rising and falling like a bird call, but lower and sadder than any bird I'd ever heard. The whistling was coming from all around me, like a whole choir of invisible people were standing in the rocks, humming the same haunting tune. "Stevens," I whispered into my radio. "I need backup, right now." "On my way. What's your 20? I looked around at the identical boulders, the narrow passages that all looked the same, the snow that was already covering my tracks. For the first time, in 21 years, I wasn't sure where I was. I'm not sure. Follow the GPS coordinates from my last transmission. Nightwind, Your beacon isn't showing up on my screen. You sure? Your equipment's working? I checked my GPS unit. The screen was lit up, but instead of coordinates, it was showing symbols I'd never seen before. Little pictures that looked like stick figures with their arms raised, like they were trying to warn me about something. The children's voices started up again, but now they were coming from a completely different direction. Help us! We're over here now! I looked back at the spot where I'd been digging. The rocks I'd moved were back in place, like I'd never touched them, and the snow was smooth and unmarked, like no one had ever been there at all. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with trapped children. I was dealing with something that could sound like trapped children. I tried to backtrack out of the boulder field, but every path I took led deeper into the maze. The whistling followed me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just out of sight. And the voices kept multiplying. Jackson, over here! My own voice from the left. Found them! Stevens's voice from the right. Daddy, help us! The Morrison children, but now they sounded scared of me instead of calling for help. My radio crackled. Nightwind, where the hell are you? I've been following your voice for 20 minutes, but every time I get close, you lead me somewhere else. Stevens, I haven't been talking on the radio. Bullshit! You've been giving me directions the whole time. Just told me to follow the trail toward the old bombing range. The old bombing range. My stomach dropped. That was the one place on the plateau we never went. The one area that was still officially off limits after all these years. During World War II, the military used dolly sods for artillery training. In 1943, there'd been an accident, a massive explosion that killed 12 civilian workers who were clearing unexploded shells from the range. Stevens, do not go toward that bombing range. I repeat, do not follow any voices toward the bombing range. What voices? I'm following you. But I wasn't talking. I was listening to someone else use my voice to lead my partner into the most dangerous part of the wilderness. The wind picked up again, and the snow started falling so hard I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. That's when I saw them. Transparent figures moving between the rocks, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 1940s. Work shirts, suspenders, old-style boots. Some of them were missing arms or legs like they'd been caught in an explosion. One of them walked right up to me and opened his mouth. My grandmother's voice came out. Jackson, honey, you need to get out of here right now. I stumbled backward and fell into the snow. You're dead. Grandma Mary died 5 years ago. The figure tilted its head and spoke again in my voice. Stevens, I need you to bring the medical kit to grid reference 847-291. Stop it! I screamed. But more figures were appearing now, dozens of them, all wearing the same 1940s work clothes, all missing pieces of themselves. They opened their mouths, and a chorus of voices poured out. Every person I'd ever known, every radio transmission I'd ever heard, every conversation I'd ever had. My father. Son, you're in real trouble now. My ex-wife. I told you those mountains would kill you someday. My army sergeant. Nightwind, report your position. The Morrison family. Why didn't you find us in time? And running underneath it all, that same 5-note whistling, over and over, like a funeral song that wouldn't end. I covered my ears and ran, crashing through the boulder field without caring where I was going. Branches tore at my face, rocks tried to trip me, and the voices followed like a pack of hungry wolves. Then my radio crackled with Stevens's real voice, faint and full of static. Shout, Mayday, Mayday! I'm lost in whiteout conditions near the bombing range. Equipment's failing. If anyone can hear this. The transmission cut to static. I tried to respond, but when I keyed my radio, one of the ghostly figures mimicked my voice perfectly. Stevens, I can see you. Head toward the red markers. But there were no red markers near the bombing range. There were only warnings in multiple languages. Danger, unexploded ordnance, keep out. The spirits weren't trying to hurt us. They were trying to warn us. But they were so confused, so lost in their own memories of the explosion, that their warnings had become death traps. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about spirits who got stuck between worlds, unable to move on because they died with unfinished business. These workers had died trying to clear explosives. 70 years later, they were still trying to do their job. still trying to save people from the bombs they couldn't defuse. But they were leading Stevens straight into the most dangerous part of the range. I had two choices: try to find Stevens before he walked into a minefield, or figure out how to send these spirits home before they killed anyone else. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature was dropping fast. In another hour, we'd both be dead from exposure, and the Morrison family would never be found. I closed my eyes and tried to remember exactly what my grandmother had taught me about helping lost spirits find peace. The Cherokee blessing ceremony was something I'd only heard about, never practiced. My grandmother had tried to teach me when I was young, but I'd been more interested in hunting and fishing than old traditions. Now, kneeling in the snow with ghostly voices swirling around me, I wished I'd paid better attention. "Spirits of the dead," I said in Cherokee, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "Your work is finished. The danger you died trying to prevent is known. You can rest now." The figures stopped moving, but they didn't disappear. If anything, they seemed more solid, more real. One of Hem stepped closer, a man with half his face missing, wearing a work shirt with Jimmy stitched on the pocket. When he opened his mouth, my grandmother's voice came out, but this time she was speaking Cherokee. "Little Hawk, they cannot rest while the metal seeds still sleep in the earth." Metal seeds. That's what she'd always called unexploded bombs. Seeds that would grow into death if disturbed. The spirit pointed toward the bombing range where Stevens was lost in the storm. As I watched, more figures appeared, all the workers who'd died in 1943, all trying to show me something. They were pointing at specific spots in the snow, locations where unexploded ordnance was still buried, and Stevens was walking right toward the biggest concentration of them. My radio crackled. "Night Wind, if you can hear this, following the trail markers toward what looks like an old bunker, gonna take shelter." There was no old bunker in that area, just a crater where the biggest explosion had happened, filled with enough unexploded shells to level half the mountain. I had to make a choice. Try the blessing ceremony and hope it worked, or leave the spirits and go after Stevens directly. That's when I understood what my grandmother had really been trying to teach me. The spirits couldn't rest because their job wasn't finished. They'd died trying to save lives, and they'd keep trying until all the danger was gone. But they couldn't do it alone. I stood up and faced the spirit named Jimmy. "Show me where he is. Show me how to save him without setting off the bombs." The figures began moving in formation, walking through the snow in single file. They were showing me a path, not the straight route Stevens had taken, but a winding trail that avoided every buried explosive. I followed them through the blizzard, trusting spirits to guide me through a minefield I couldn't see. The weight and was howling now, and the snow was so thick I could barely make out the ghostly figures ahead of me. But they never wavered, never hesitated. They knew exactly where every bomb was buried, because they'd died trying to clear them. After what felt like hours, I saw a light ahead. Stevens had managed to start a small fire in the shelter of some rocks, but he was sitting directly on top of what the spirits were showing me was a cluster of artillery shells. "Stevens," I called, "don't move. Stay exactly where you are." He looked up, relief flooding his face. "Night Wind, thank God. I've been following your voice for hours, but I kept getting turned around." "That wasn't me. Listen carefully. You're sitting on unexploded ordnance from the war. If you move wrong, we're both dead." His face went white. "Are you serious?" The spirits were all around us now, pointing and gesturing, showing me the exact pattern of buried explosives. It was like looking at a map, only I could see. "I'm going to throw you a rope," I said, uncoiling my climbing line. "When I say pull, you're going to slide straight toward me. Don't stand up, don't shift your weight, just slide." I threw the rope, and Stevens caught it. The spirit named Jimmy was standing right beside him, and when Jimmy nodded, I knew it was safe. "Pull!" Stevens slid across the snow toward me, and nothing exploded. The spirits had guided him along the only safe path out of the crater. But we weren't safe yet. We were still in the middle of a minefield, and the storm was getting worse. That's when I remembered the rest of my grandmother's teachings. To send spirits home, you had to acknowledge their sacrifice and release them from their obligations. I stood up in the howling wind and spoke in Cherokee, loud enough for all of them to hear. Warriors who died protecting others, your duty is complete. You have saved more lives. You have earned your rest. One by one, the spirits began to fade. But before Jimmy disappeared completely, he smiled and spoke in his own voice for the first time. The metal seeds are mapped No. W. Tell them where we marked the ground. Then they were gone, and Stevens and I were alone in the storm, with the knowledge of where every unexploded bomb was buried. We found the Morrison family 3 hours later, alive but unconscious from hypothermia, huddled in a natural shelter at the edge of the plateau. They'd been following voices too, children's voices that led them away from the bombing range and toward safety. The spirits had been trying to save them all along. Stevens died 2 days later in the hospital, not from the exposure or the bombs, but from what the doctors called sudden cardiac failure. I knew better. He'd spent too long listening to voices that shouldn't exist, and something inside him just couldn't handle it. The Morrison family recovered, but they never talked about what they'd experienced on the mountain. Tom Morrison looked me in the eye once and said, "Those weren't children calling to us, were they, Ranger?" I told him what I tell everyone who asks about that night. In conditions like that, sound plays tricks on you. But I know the truth. The military came in a week later with metal detectors and excavation equipment. They said they were conducting a routine environmental assessment. But I watched them dig up artillery shells and mortar rounds from exactly the spots the spirits had marked. They worked for 3 months, removing enough unexploded ordnance to fill 2 trucks. When they were finished, the area was declared safe for the first time since 1943. I still work in dolly sods, but I'm different now. Every voice I hear, every sound in the wilderness, I question. Is that really a hiker calling for help, or something else using a human voice to communicate? Are those really coyotes howling in the distance, or spirits trying to pass along a message? The other rangers think I'm getting paranoid in my old age. They don't know that, so. Times on quiet winter nights, I still hear that 5-note whistling drifting across the plateau. But it's different now, peaceful, like a lullaby instead of a warning. My grandmother always said the mountains remember everything, every footstep, every word, every soul that passes through. In dolly sods, that's literally true. The land itself holds onto voices, storing them in the rocks and releasing them when conditions are right. Most of the time, those voices are just echoes of the living. But sometimes, when tragedy leaves spirits with unfinished business, the mountains become a kind of recording device for the dead. I've learned to listen more carefully now, to tell the difference between echoes and actual communication. And I've started teaching other rangers about the old Cherokee ways of helping lost spirits find peace. Because there are other military training sites throughout these mountains, other places where young men died far from home trying to protect people they'd never meet. And sometimes, they're still trying. Last month, a family got lost near the old chemical weapons testing site up north. They said children's voices led them to safety, but no children were ever found in the area. I'm getting too old for these mountains, but I'm not ready to retire yet. There's still work to be done, and I think I'm finally learning how to do it right. My name is Jackson Nightwind, and I've been a ranger in these mountains for 22 years now, long enough to know that some voices should be trusted and others should be laid to rest. But it took me most of that time to learn the difference.